Hey guys, tonight we're doing something grimy, grim and oddly fascinating. You're not in a castle, not among the swirling dresses of some Victorian ball, nope, you're somewhere far more aromatic. Welcome to the filth-crusted underbelly of 19th century rural England. You're going to live a full life here, probably a short one, in a drafty shack with a dirt floor, an outhouse full of frozen waste in winter, and a family so large it's basically a rugby team. You'll work before you can spell your own name, die with all your teeth gone, and likely never travel farther than the next village unless you're in a pine box. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps keep the smokehouse warm, so to speak. Now tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I want to know which brave soul is listening to tales of rotting food and toothless matrons in the dead of night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to grey. Not metaphorical grey, literal grey. The ceiling above your straw-stuffed mattress is stained wood beams with soot creeping across the cracks. There's no insulation, unless you count the tattered curtain someone nailed to the north-facing wall. It flaps in the draught like a defeated flag. Cold? Yes, always. Even in summer, mornings like this have a chill. You can see your breath fogging up as you breathe, and the seal. Ah, there it is. Wood smoke, mildew, and something vaguely barnyard. Your bed is shared with two younger siblings. One kicks in their sleep, the other wets themselves, frequently. So the straw smells like that too. You try not to think about it. The only reason you haven't died of respiratory infection yet is because your body's too stubborn. Or maybe it's that weekly spoonful of molasses your mum swears keeps the bad humours away. You sit up and instantly regret it. You're sore. Always sore. You're 10 years old and you feel 60. Your legs hurt from hauling water. Your back hurts from chopping wood. Your hands are cracked. And you don't even have real shoes. Just a pair of stiff leather hobnail boots handed down from your uncle who died of the fever. They sort of fit if you stuff the toes with straw. You can hear the rooster outside. But that's not what wakes you. What wakes you is your dad yelling. He always yells, that's his tone. If you want something less gruff, try the cows. He's shouting about, about the cow's mastitis again. Something about pus in the milk. Breakfast will be fun. You stumble out of bed and dress in the same clothes you wore yesterday. Wool trousers, itchy. A smock shirt with a hole in the armpit. A belt made from twine. You splash your face with water from the chipped basin. Water hauled in yesterday from the well a quarter-mile away. You don't drink from this, not unless you want a week of gut agony. Downstairs, the one-room house is already smoky from the stove. Mum's crouched over a pan making porridge. It's beige, lumpy and bubbling ominously. She doesn't say good morning. She just hands you a bowl and you sit on the bench, using a spoon made from pewter that tastes faintly of metal and mould. The porridge has something in it. You try not to look closely. It might be a bit of husk or... yeah, that might have moved. You eat it anyway. There's no alternative. There's a window, sort of. It's glass, but cracked, and only half the panes remain. The rest is stuffed with rags to keep the cold out. Doesn't work. Through the gaps, you see the fields beyond. It rained last night. Everything's mud. It's always mud. Your boots will suck into it like leeches. Here's a historical truth for you. Rural Victorians like you, especially the lower working class, rarely owned land. You rented, or you worked someone else's land in exchange for shelter and a few miserable coins. If your father's lucky, you'll all survive winter. If he's unlucky, the rent collector comes, and you're in the workhouse by Christmas. You head outside. The air hits you like a wet slap. It smells of manure and wood smoke with a slight tang of something dead in the ditch. A neighbour's dog maybe, or a fox someone finally caught and forgot to bury. You walk past the privy, a rickety wooden hut with a pit underneath. You'll use it later. You hope the frost hasn't made the seat a meat grinder. Here's your quirky fact. Many rural Victorians believed cats could steal a baby's breath. So while you love the barn cat for keeping rats away, your mum's always watching it like it's plotting murder. She shoos it from the baby's crib daily. You see your brother out in the paddock already, trying to fix the fence. The pigs got out again. You have to help. You always help. That's life here. You're not a child. You're free labour. No one has time to coddle you or ask how your day's going. The only mental health day you get is when you're too sick to stand. As the sun struggles up behind the trees, casting long wet shadows, you take a moment and wonder, just for a second, if there's more to life than this. Not that it matters. Dreaming is for people with full stomachs and clean feet. You've got a pig to chase and chores until sundown. There's a debate among historians about just how bad it really was for rural Victorians. Some argue that despite the filth and hardship, they had tight-knit communities and simple joys. Others say that's rose-tinted nonsense, and that misery was the main course every single day. Honestly, from where you're standing, knee-deep in pig muck and unpaid bills, you know where you land on that one. And so begins your day, one of thousands, all blending into each other like the endless boot-sucking mud. Welcome to rural Victorian life. You're going to smell awful, freeze, frizz constantly, and maybe, just maybe, live long enough to complain about it. You were born in this cottage, not in a hospital, not even in the company of a trained midwife. Just right here, in the same room where your mother gave birth to 6 other children, only 4 of whom are still alive. The air inside then smelled of sweat, wood smoke and afterbirth, and if you listen closely on cold mornings, you can still hear the wind whistling through the gaps in the walls where no one ever quite figured out how to keep out the chill. The door has never properly shut, and your father jammed a bent nail into the frame to stop it swinging in the wind. It still swings. There was no celebration, no cigars, or no weight or the length written down in a baby book. Just a passing nod from the local woman who cut the cord with kitchen shears and wiped you off with a rag that's now being used to plug a draft near the hearth. You were wrapped in whatever cloth was driest and placed in a splintery cradle near the fire. That same cradle now holds potatoes. It's all very full circle, really. As a baby, you were probably quiet, too cold to cry much. The fire burned low that winter, and there wasn't much to eat. Your mother tells you now, not unkindly, that she didn't think you'd make it through your first February, but you did because you're tough or stubborn, or just lucky, depending on which relative you ask. The cottage has only 2 rooms. The main room is the kitchen, the dining area, the sitting room, and your parents' bedroom all in one. Then there's the back room, a kind of storage shed that got hastily converted into sleeping quarters for the children when you started outnumbering the furniture. That room smells faintly of onions and strongly of mildew. It floods when it rains, which is often. There's no chimney cap, so the hearth leaks smoke every time there's a strong wind. Your clothes are permanently smoky. Everything you eat tastes faintly of ash. And you've grown so used to that flavour that clean food, on the rare occasion you've tasted it, actually makes you suspicious. What's this? Why isn't it grey? You've never slept in a real bed. Just pallets made of old straw laid directly on wooden slats, with thin woolen blankets full of holes and dreams. Fleas are just part of life. You don't even try to avoid them anymore. Sometimes you squish them between your fingers for fun, just to feel like you're winning something. Here's a solid historical truth. Most rural dwellings like yours were built from whatever was available. Mud, stone, straw, rotting timber, and were rarely maintained. If your father is especially diligent or just paranoid about the place collapsing on top of you, he'll patch holes with scraps of canvas or sod, but mostly these homes leaned, creaked, and groaned like old men with bad knees. In winter, the inside temperature wasn't much better than outside. In summer, the smell of everything fermenting in the heat turned the house into a sort of living, breathing compost heap. This brings us to the birthright of misery you've inherited. Not just the house, not just the chores, not just the endless cold, but the expectation that this is all there is. You'll grow up here, marry a neighbour, probably one of the ones you currently throw rocks at, and raise a brood of your own in the same damp room where you learn to walk. Your family doesn't talk about leaving. That would be like suggesting the moon should pay rent. You just accept it. You don't have a birth certificate. That's not something rural folk bother with unless there's some legal reason. You're about 10, according to your mum, though your cousin claims you're older. Your birthday gets lumped in with everyone else's. One shared cake made of bread crusts and whatever jam survived the summer. You once got a wooden spoon as a birthday gift. You still treasure it. It's currently being used to prop up a shelf. Here's your quirky fact of the night. In some rural areas, newborns were passed over the fire as part of a folk ritual to burn off evil spirits. Your great-grandmother swore it was the only reason your Uncle Bertie didn't end up cursed with wandering madness. Of course, he later walked into a river while chasing a goose, so the effectiveness of that ritual is still under scholarly review. Which leads us to this. Not all of your upbringing is terrible. Sometimes at night, when the fire is hot and no one's arguing, your dad will tell stories. mostly made-up ones about a one-eyed ox who wins wrestling matches against Frenchmen. And when your mum sings, her voice is soft and almost too sweet for this place. She sings in the old dialect, songs that her mother taught her, and her mother before that. You don't understand all the words here, but they comfort you. You once asked your father why the roof leaks. He told you, without irony, that it's a reminder to be humble. Then he swore at the rainwater dripping onto his stew. That's kind of how life works here. Stoic resignation mixed with occasional bursts of profanity. There's still debate among historians about whether rural Victorians like your family were content with their lot. Romanticists argue that peasants found joy in simplicity, music, faith, the seasons. Revisionists counter that most were exhausted, underfed, and terrified of getting sick. You're not sure who's right? All you know is that when you lie awake at night, staring at the cracked beams above your head, you don't feel content, you feel stuck. And yet here you are, alive, breathing smoky air, sharing your space with rats, possibly ghosts, and certainly more siblings than you'd prefer. But you made it through infancy, that's more than some. And in a few hours, you'll be out in the fields again, scraping what little life you can from the same dirt your grandfather cursed into. This is your beginning. You were born into mud. And if things go well, you might rise just far enough above it to call it home. You don't look forward to breakfast. No one in your family does, but skipping it isn't an option either. You need calories, even bad ones. Especially bad ones. So when your mum shuffles over with a wooden bowl, steam curling from it like a spirit trying to escape, you brace yourself. It's porridge again, it's always porridge. Oats boiled in water with the occasional blessing of milk, usually from your own cow, assuming she wasn't stepped on or struck by a passing fever. You wish this was the kind of porridge the gentry eat, soft and golden with cream and sugar. Yours is grey and gelatinous, like wallpaper paste that's lost the will to stick. You stir it with your spoon, examining it closely. That might be a grain husk, or it might be something less appetizing. You squint. It wriggles. You pretend it doesn't. Your mother is already back at the stove, and your brother is halfway through his own bowl, chewing mechanically like a tired ox. So you eat. You've learnt to gulp it down quickly before your nose can get too involved. The warmth helps, the texture doesn't. It coats your mouth like a curse. Sometimes, if you're lucky, there's a crust of bread on the side, chipped from a hard loaf that's been hanging in the pantry since Monday. It's Tuesday now, dimbo, and the pantry is really just a wooden box with a bit of netting on the front, hanging near the stove to keep things fresh. The bread is dry, crumbling in your hands, but it adds crunch. That's a luxury here. Texture. You even chew slowly, just to feel something new. You tell yourself it's not mouldy, just dusty, probably. Breakfast is eaten in silence, unless you count the scraping of spoons and the occasional snort from your younger sibling, who has a bad habit of snorting porridge up his nose when he laughs. But there's nothing funny today. Not really ever. The food doesn't inspire conversation. Neither does the weather, because it's always raining, or about to rain, or just finished raining. Here's a factual nibble for you. Rural Victorian diets were incredibly plain. Oats, potatoes, root vegetables, and the bread were staples. Meat was rare, usually only eaten on Sundays or when an animal died. Most meals were boiled because it was the easiest way to cook large portions over a hearth. Flavours came from salt, if you could afford it, and whatever herbs you had growing around the house. Which, for your family, means a small patch of limp thyme and something your mum swears is parsley but probably isn't. You miss meat, not because you ever had much of it, but because of how people talk about it. The way your uncle once described roast beef, fat crackling, juices dripping, it haunts you more than most ghost stories. The closest you've come was a slice of ham 3 Christmases ago. It had a ribbon of fat so thick you chewed for nearly 5 minutes and still swallowed it whole. You think about it often, like a lost love. But today it's porridge and maybe a sour apple, if you get out the door fast enough to claim one before your siblings do. There's a bowl on the table, 4 apples, 7 children. It's a blood sport. You lock eyes with your older sister. She lunges, you dive. It's yours. Victory tastes like bitterness and half-rotten skin, but it's your prize. You nibble around the bruise. Now here's a fringe fact for you. In certain rural parts of England, it was believed that eating food while standing could give you indigestion so bad, it would twist your guts permanently. Your grandmother used to make you sit every time you ate, even if it was just a crust. Even if there was no chair, she'd tell you to squat. Your knees have never been the same. After breakfast, your mum packs a small bundle for your father, a heel of bread wrapped in cloth. Maybe a sliver of cheese if she managed to trade eggs with the neighbour yesterday. He grunts in thanks and lumbers out into the mist, boots squelching as he disappears toward the fields. You wish you were going with him, even though you know it's backbreaking. Anything to get out of the house. Instead, you're on chicken duty. The coop is behind the house, built from spare wood and rusted wire fencing. You hate it. It smells like death and feathers, and this rooster is territorial to the point of attempted murder. He comes at your legs as soon as you step inside, wings outstretched like he thinks he's a tiny dragon. You kick gently, not enough to hurt, but enough to send a message. He backs off. For now. You gather the eggs, wiping off the worst of the muck. One is cracked. You'll eat that one today. The others will be saved or traded. Your hands stink now even more than before, but there's no soap, not unless someone in the village is boiling lye this week. You wipe them on your trousers and hope for the pinned. A cold wind picks up as you walk back inside, rattling the shutters that never shut and slipping through the cracks in the door. Your mother's already cleaning the bowls with hot water and a rag. No soap, just heat and muscle. She's humming. You don't recognise the tune. Might be made up, or maybe it's something from before her time here. Here's the debate. Some historians argue that despite the poor quality of rural food, families like yours were healthier than their urban counterparts because at least you had some access to fresh milk, eggs and vegetables. Others argue that's optimistic nonsense, pointing out the constant malnutrition, parasites, and lack of dietary variety. From where you're sitting, sucking marrow from a reheated bone left over from Sunday's stew, you'd say both sides are wrong. Healthy? You? You've had diarrhea more times than birthdays. Still you survive, and that's the great miracle of your life, continuing to survive in a place where survival itself feels like a chore. You wonder what the rich eat. You've heard tales of oranges, chocolate and butter so soft it spreads without tearing the bread. You can't even imagine it. You've never tasted sugar that wasn't mixed with ashes. The day has barely begun, and already your stomach aches in a way that isn't quite hunger anymore. It's more like a constant whisper that something's missing. Something vital, but you ignore it. There's work to do, mud to slog through, and maybe, if you're lucky, another bite of something before the day ends. That's breakfast, that's the start. And if you're wondering whether it gets better from here, well, not yet. You pull on your stiff wool trousers, still damp from yesterday's rain, and brace yourself for the uniquely awful feeling of wet wool clinging to bare skin. There's no such thing as undergarments in your world. Not for children, and not really for anyone unless they are rich enough to own multiple layers. You own one set of clothes for the week, and when they get too filthy to bear, you scrape them clean with a stiff brush, rinse them in cold water, and hang them over the hearth to dry. They don't really dry, they just get slightly less wet, then absorb smoke and whatever's been boiling in the pot that week, usually cabbage. The trousers have a hole in the knee, and the start of another one in the seat. You've patched them before with mismatched scraps, but the fabric is wearing thin in places no patch will help. The seams itch, the waistband sags, you tie it off with twine. Your shirt, coarse, undyed cotton, was white once, but is now a kind of earth tone with a sour smell you no longer notice. The collar is permanently damp from your neck sweat, and the armpits have crusted into shapes that feel mildly weaponized. And then there's your coat. If you're lucky enough to have one at all, it's probably made from old wool, handed down so many times it's more holes than fabric. The buttons don't match. Most are wooden pegs carved with a kitchen knife, and one sleeve has been sewn back on sideways. It doesn't matter. The goal is warmth, not fashion. Not that anyone here cares about fashion. You've never seen a mirror bigger than a dinner plate, and the only time your appearance comes up is when your mum drags a comb through your hair and mutters about lice. Your boots, if you can even call them that, are leather-wrapped remnants of someone else's childhood. They're too big, so you pack the toes with rags, the soles are cracked, and every step is a gamble on whether today will be the day a nail finally breaks through and jabs you in the foot. You wear them anyway. Going barefoot is an option, sure, if you enjoy frostbite and tetanus. Here's a historical gem. Most rural Victorians didn't wash their outer clothes more than once every few weeks, sometimes not for months. It wasn't laziness, it was practicality. There was rarely enough water, soap was expensive, and drying clothes in damp English weather was a multi-day affair. So people wore their clothes until they couldn't anymore. And even then, they might just layer something else over the top and carry on. You remember a time when a neighbour's house caught fire. The whole village came to gawk and helped douse the flames with buckets from the well. What everyone remembers, though, wasn't the flames. It was the smell. Burned wool, soaked cotton, and the dense, greasy reek of clothes that hadn't seen soap in half a year. You can still smell it in your mind. Sometimes you wonder if you smell like that right now. You try not to think about lice, but they're always there. Tiny roommates you never invited. Bedbugs too. You scratch at your collarbone, feeling the familiar tickle of something crawling. You tell yourself it's just your imagination. It's not. Later, your sister will light a candle and comb your hair out near the hearth, watching the tiny insects sizzle when they hit the flame. It's almost festive. Almost. Your mother keeps a little bar of yellow soap wrapped in linen, stashed away like treasure. It's for real washing, Sunday washing or cleaning wounds. It smells sharp, almost spicy. You sniff it when she's not looking, like it's perfume. Once your cousin tried to eat it. He didn't get far. Here's your quirky fact for the night. In some villages, folks believe that washing your full body too often weakened your constitution. A good layer of grime was seen as protection. Nature's armour, they called it. There are elderly villagers who bathe once a year, usually before Easter. They say it's enough. Their feet say otherwise. But the truth is, filth isn't optional. It's part of your identity. Dirt under the nails, grease on the forehead, smudges that never quite come out. You try to keep your hands clean, but your nails are black from the garden, and there's a permanent crescent of muck at the base of your thumb. You once heard a visiting preacher talk about the body as a temple. Yours is more like a barn, leaky, stinking, and full of vermin. And yet, there's a strange pride in it. You've survived winters in these clothes, climbed trees, chased geese, fallen into streams, and dried out in front of the fire, wrapped in a coat that smells like 10 different types of smoke. When the wind picks up and the fog rolls in, you pull your scarf tighter, knitted by your grandmother with a pattern she probably stole from someone else, and you feel almost prepared. There's a scholarly debate that tickles historians to this day. Were rural Victorians as filthy as we think, or has modern cleanliness made us snobbish in retrospect? Some argue that for the time they were doing just fine, washing hands when necessary, boiling linens when disease broke out, and doing the best they could with what they had. Others paint a bleaker picture: crusted skin, oozing sores, and a pervasive funk that made visitors gag. You know which side of the argument you'd support. You live it. When your family crowds into the small church for Sunday service, the combined odour of 50 unwashed bodies in wool clothing practically peels the paint off the walls. The priest always burns incense. You're pretty sure it's not for spiritual reasons. Still, you do what you can. You brush off the worst of the hay from your coat, scrub your face with cold water until your cheeks sting, and once a week your mum boils a pot and gives everyone a quick hair rinse, with vinegar, if it's been a particularly itchy week. Clean enough. Good enough. No one's expecting a duke to visit. You step outside, clothes clinging, boots creaking, hair damp from a fast splash at the basin. The morning air hits you like a wet towel, sharp and full of the usual smells: dung, ash, smoke, and something faintly rotten from the compost pile. Your clothes absorb it like sponges. You smell like the village already, and you haven't even left the yard. And yet, as you head out toward the barn, you feel strangely prepared. Armoured even. Like you're wearing the grime of your ancestors. It's not just clothing, it's survival gear. And if it itches, well, so does life. You don't want to go out to the privy, but you have to. There's no holding it until later, not in a belly trained on porridge, old bread, and cabbage water. Nature calls early and often out here, and when it calls, it shouts. So you slip through the back door with a groan, pulling your scarf over your nose like a soldier heading into trench warfare. Because the privy isn't just bad, it's a whole experience. The path leading there is a thin trail of flattened grass and mud, winding between the chicken's scratching ground and a pile of half-rotted firewood. Your boots squelch in the cold muck, and every step threatens to rob you of one entirely. The air is sharp and earthy, rich with the scent of manure, wet wood, and the slow death of summer's last crops. A crow watches you from a crooked fence post, its feathers puffed out against the cold, judging, always judging. The privy itself is a leaning box made of mismatched boards, some of which are now warped into permanent waves. The door hangs crooked, and the inside latch broke off last year, so if you want privacy, you wedge a rock against the base, or shout loud enough to alert anyone approaching. Not that people bother to wait. Everyone's seen everyone else's backside at some point in this village. It's like a social rite. You step inside and immediately regret it. The smell is worse than usual. Thick, humid, and somehow both sweet and rotten. The pit below hasn't been shoveled out in weeks, and you can tell, you always can, there are flies even now, even in October. Where do they come from? You don't want to know. You do your business quickly, balancing over the opening with a grimace and your coat held close. No seat, no lid, just 2 planks with a gap, and below that the accumulated efforts of your family and several previous tenants. There's no toilet paper, of course, just leaves, old newspaper scraps if you're lucky, and the occasional soft corn husk. You once tried dumpster-eyed wool. Never again. Here's your historical fact. In most rural Victorian homes, indoor plumbing simply didn't exist. Even chamber pots were a luxury, and for poor families, the outhouse, or more accurately, the midden, was a standard fixture. Human waste was sometimes even used to fertilise gardens, which you now realise is probably why the carrots always taste faintly of tragedy. The roof of the privy has a hole. When it rains inside too. Which means you've sometimes had the joy of doing your business while water drips on your head. Last winter it iced over. You slipped. You fell. You didn't speak for a full day afterward. Your siblings still tell that story like it's a comedy. And just when you think you're done and ready to escape, you spot movement in the corner. You freeze. A rat. Or something that used to be a rat. It's missing most of its fur and looks at you with the kind of apathy only vermin can muster. You stare at each other for a moment. Then it disappears into a gap in the boards, trailing a long, naked tail. You've lost your appetite. Here's your fringe fact of the night. In some villages, people swore by privy charms, little carved tokens or herbs hung near the seat to keep away evil spirits that supposedly lurked near waste pits. Your great-aunt once tied a dead mole to the rafters above hers, claimed it kept the cholera away. Whether it worked or not is up for debate. But the smell sure kept the neighbours at bay. You stumble back outside, lungs gulping the cold, fresh air like it's brand new. The house doesn't smell great either, but it's better than the privy. You wipe your hands on your trousers, not that it helps, and make a mental note to find the vinegar bottle later. Your fingernails feel contaminated. There's a scholarly debate that still circles around sanitation in the Victorian countryside. Some argue that rural life, with its wide open spaces and lower population density, allowed for cleaner living than crowded, disease-ridden cities. Others, especially those who've studied the state of country privies and drinking wells, point out that cholera and typhoid made no class distinction when human waste was dumped uphill from a well. In your village, the privy stands downhill, but only just, and the stream runs past it like it doesn't know better. You remember when the village elder died last year? Everyone whispered about the flux. That's the polite term. The truth was his privy had collapsed underneath him. He got stuck. Exposure and embarrassment did the rest. Now you always tap the boards with your foot before you step in, just to be sure. Sometimes you envy the birds. They just drop their waste wherever they like and fly away. No muddy boots, no flies swarming their outhouse, no close encounters with rodents, just freedom and sky. But then you remember they eat worms and live in hedges. You guess there are trade-offs. Back inside, your mother barely glances at you. She's elbow deep in dough, her arms dusted with flour that's more sawdust than wheat. Your sister is peeling something green and squishy at the table. Breakfast is long over. There's work to be done, and there's always work to be done. You peel off your scarf and coat, hang them on the same peg everyone else uses. The fabric is damp, and the air inside smells faintly of damp wool and cabbage steam. Comforting, in its own foul way, the smell of routine, of life as it is. It's easy to forget that this entire routine, rising, eating, dressing, using the privy, is only the beginning of your day. You've already suffered indignities no one should have to face before sunrise, and yet now the real labour begins. But before that, you rub your hands near the fire, trying to feel them again. The chill settled deep in your bones this morning. Is the kind of cold that lingers. You look down at your trousers and spot a fresh stain. It's either mud or worse. You sigh. Doesn't matter. Everything smells the same after an hour in the barn anyway. And so you continue, layered in filth, laced with cold and marked by a morning that's already tested your resolve. One privy trip at a time, you're surviving Victorian rural life. Whether it gets easier or just more familiar, well, that's still up for debate. If you're expecting a school bell, think again. No clanging triangle, no orderly desks, no blackboard full of chalky equations, just the clucking of hens and the occasional shout from your father to stop daydreaming and grab the damn bucket. The closest thing to a curriculum is the morning routine. Feed the chickens, haul water, mend the gate, scrape mud off the pig's hooves, and if there's still light left in the day, maybe, just maybe, read a page or two from the tattered Bible someone left behind after the last funeral. You don't go to school, not regularly anyway. Some days the local chapel offers lessons for the younger children, mostly reading scripture and drilling you on the alphabet, but it's not consistent. It depends on whether the vicar's wife feels up to it or whether the teacher's boots have dried from the last storm. You once went 2 weeks without a lesson because the teacher caught influenza and her backup was busy giving birth. That was considered a pretty normal break. Your parents believe in education the same way they believe in ghosts, sort of, but only when it's convenient. What matters more is what you can do with your hands. Your father says, "Oh, mo bucket ever milked a cow." You've never argued, partly because you know he's right, and partly because you've seen him swing a fence post like a cricket bat. When there's work to be done, the alphabet can wait, and there's always work to be done. This morning you're tasked with helping your older brother herd the sheep from the north field to the lower pasture, which involves a lot of shouting, waving your arms like a madman, and occasionally being butted in the knees by a particularly surly ewe. The sheep are not smart. One walks into the same tree every time you pass it. Another has a limp that seems entirely performative. Still, they're valuable. More valuable than you, probably. At least they have wool and give birth to things people can eat. Your boots sink deep into the muck with each step. The fields are soaked from last night's drizzle, and there's a soft mist hanging over everything, like the sky couldn't be bothered to finish raining and just decided to sulk. The fog mixes with the smell of sheep dung, wet grass, and your own stale clothes. The air is thick enough to chew. You push on. Here's your historical fact of the day. Compulsory education didn't become fully enforced in rural England until the 1880s, and even then, enforcement was weak in agricultural areas. Farm labour was simply more valuable than literacy, and most families couldn't afford to lose a working child just to teach them long division. In many villages, truancy officers were as welcome as rats in the grain stores. You pass by the village school on the way to the lower field. It's a squat building with one crooked window, a broken slate roof, and a rope swing out front that no one uses anymore since it snapped mid-swing and broke poor Eli Miller's wrist. The teacher, if she's there, waves from the door. You wave back. Today's not a school day for you, though. You've got sheep to wrangle and a hole in the barn roof to patch before the rain comes back. You'd like to go to school more. You'd never say that out loud, your siblings would laugh, but there's something peaceful about it. The way the teacher writes letters on the board. The warmth of a room filled with other kids your age, all scratching on stellates and whispering when the teacher's back is turned. You remember one lesson where she read from a book about a boy who lived in a city and owned shoes with actual soles. That story stayed with you. Sometimes you imagine walking those streets, dodging horse carts, maybe working in a shop, not because it's easier, just different. Less mud, maybe. Your brother shouts. One of the sheep is wandering toward the ditch again. You bolt after it, feet slipping in the mud, coat flapping. You manage to grab its wool and yank it back onto the path. It stares at you like it's deeply disappointed in your choices. You feel the same. And now for your quirky fact. In some rural schools, especially church-run ones, left-handed children were forced to write with their right hands because left-handedness was seen as a sign of the devil, or at best, unnatural. You're left-handed, but no one's bothered to notice yet. You've just learned to do most things with both hands out of necessity. Try milking a goat one-handed sometime. It builds character. By midday the sheep are settled, and you trudge back to the cottage. Your clothes are soaked, and your boots squelch with every step. There's mud on your chin, your elbows, and somehow in your hair. You're too tired to care. Your stomach rumbles, but there's no sign of lunch. Lunch isn't really a thing here. You might get a heel of bread or a boiled turnip if you're lucky, but mostly it's just a glass of water and the promise of stew later, if you're lucky. You wonder how many children your age know how to gut a fish or kill a chicken with one swing. You wonder how many can read. Probably more now, but not around here. Around here you read faces, weather patterns, and the colour of the sky before a storm. You read the way the sheep move and how the wind sounds when it brings bad luck. You don't get grades for that kind of knowledge, but you get to eat. There's an ongoing debate among historians. Did rural children feel deprived of education, or were they unaware of what they were missing? Some argue that children like you had no concept of the outside world and were content with what they knew. Others point out the oral histories, the letters, the rare surviving diaries that speak of longing. For books, for knowledge, for something more. You don't write a diary, you don't know how. but sometimes you scratch shapes in the dirt and pretend they mean something. As the sun begins to lower in the sky, and the air starts to shift with the smell of damp firewood and the promise of another long night, you find a quiet moment by the gate. You lean on the post looking out at the fields. They're beautiful in their own bleak way, green, endless, and older than anyone alive. You close your eyes and imagine a classroom with a chalkboard, a desk of your own, maybe even a real pencil. But the wind howls, and your brother is calling again. The day's not over. Education can wait. The pigs still need slop, the chickens need herding in, and the stew won't make itself. You sigh, wipe your muddy hands on your shirt, and head back to the work you know. By the time the sun hangs overhead like a lazy coin in a foggy sky, it's officially the middle of the day. That should mean something, some kind of pause, a moment to sit and chew thoughtfully on a warm biscuit or gaze out across the fields with a full belly and a dozy smile. But here in your village, midday means one thing: penny dinners, if you're lucky. And today, as your boots clomp back across the threshold and into the smoky warmth of your home, you're not feeling particularly lucky. The fire's still going, though weakly. There's a single pot over the flames, and whatever's inside has been boiling since morning. The smell is complicated. A base note of cabbage, definitely. Maybe turnip, possibly onion. There's a sourness to it that suggests something pickled or forgotten for too long. You don't ask. You never ask. You just grab your chipped bowl from the shelf and wait. Your mum ladles out a scoop with the kind of resigned sigh she saves for Thursdays, when supplies are thin and creativity is forced. You glance inside your bowl. It's mostly liquid, pale and cloudy, with one floating sliver of carrot and a limp bit of something green that might be nettle, or just a tired leaf. A couple of grain husks hover near the rim like they're trying to escape. And resting near the bottom is a piece of bread. Technically, it's so hard it might survive a hammer strike, but the warmth of the broth has softened it enough to bite, if not quite to chew. You eat quickly because if you sit too long and think about it, you'll lose momentum. The bread squishes in your teeth like a sponge left too long in the rain, and the broth tastes faintly of metal. That's probably from the pot. It's been scorched so many times it now flavours everything with the ghosts of dinners past. Still, it's food, and food is survival. Here's your historical fact. Penny dinners were an actual social movement in Victorian England, especially in industrial towns. They offered extremely cheap, often charity-funded meals to the poor, usually broth, bread, and maybe a little meat if you were incredibly lucky. In rural areas like yours, the concept exists more informally. You don't pay a penny, you just hope there's enough scrap to throw into the pot. Today's dinner is thinner than usual. You can practically see the bottom of your bowl through the broth. You glance around and notice your mum giving a smaller portion to your younger sister. That's how it works here. The little ones first, then the men, then the rest of you in order of who whines loudest. The baby always gets the best piece of carrot. Your father's not home though, which means slightly larger servings for everyone else. It's the little wins. You catch a glimpse of something dark floating near the surface of your bowl and, against all better judgment, fish it out. It's a hare. Not yours, probably not human. You place it on the table without comment and keep eating. It's too late to be precious. Your brother sitting beside you farts loudly. He doesn't apologise. The table erupts in tired laughter, mostly because it's the only thing about this meal with any substance. Your mum sighs, tells him to mind himself, then turns back to the stove, with a spoon still clutched like a weapon. You continue to chew your bread-spoon combo until your jaw hurts. Here's your quirky fact. In some rural kitchens, families would keep a perpetual stew going for days or even for weeks, adding water, scraps and leftovers endlessly. It was a living organism of sorts, with flavours mutating as new ingredients joined the broth. You've heard stories of old villagers who swore their stew pots hadn't been emptied in a decade. You think about this as you sip your soup, wondering how many ancestral flavours are lurking in there, just waiting for their moment. After the meal, the bowls are rinsed with hot water and set near the fire to dry. No soap, of course, just heat and faith. The bread crusts that survive the broth are collected and saved for dinner. Second soup, your mum calls it, though it's often thinner than the first. Sometimes the crusts go to the pigs, if they're lucky. Today, you might be the pig. You consider asking for more, but the look on your mum's face stops you. Her lips are tight. She's scraping the last bits from the bottom of the pot and licking the spoon like it's dessert. That tells you everything. You wash your hands in the basin near the door, just a splash, enough to remove the worst of the grease. The water is already grey. No one's changed it since morning. There's a debate among historians about just how bad the rural Victorian diet really was. Some argue that subsistence farming families had access to fresher ingredients, eggs, milk, wild greens, even the occasional rabbit if they lived near woods. Others counter that many rural poor sold their best produce to afford rent or coal, leaving themselves with the leftovers, wilted cabbage, potato skins and bread made from more chalk than wheat. You're living that debate one sad spoonful at a time. Once, about a year ago, you visited a neighbour who was married to a man with a job in town. He brought home real flour. They had a meat pie. You still think about that pie. It had chunks, it chewed back. Your own meals rarely do. Most of your food collapses in the mouth like an apology. Outside, the sky is darkening again, even though it's not even 3. Rain, probably, or mist. Or the kind of wet that never becomes actual drops but just sits on your skin until you feel soggy down to the bone. You're grateful for the soup's warmth. Thin as it was, it'll hold you for an hour or two before your belly starts complaining again. And when it does, you'll pretend not to hear it. That's the trick, really. Pretending you're full, you learn to savour the ritual of eating more than the food itself the moment you sit. The weight of the bowl in your hands, the brief illusion of enough. You play it in your mind later when hunger comes back. Remember the warmth, the taste, even if there was a hair in it, even if it was barely soup, and you reach for your scarf and hat again. Back outside. The afternoon chores wait, and no one gets to sit around feeling sorry for themselves. Not in this house. The fire needs feeding. The pigs need slop, the roof still leaks, and someone needs to move the potato sack that's soaking in the corner. You stretch your back, feel the creak in your bones already settling in, and step back into the mud, your belly slightly less hollow, and your head full of the lingering taste of cabbage water and crust. Another meal done, another day half survived. By now, your stomach stopped pretending it ever had food in it, and your arms ache with the low, steady throb of fatigue that started around age 6 and never quite left. Lunch, if of that thin broth counted, was over an hour ago, and the sky's growing dim despite the early hour. You don't need a clock to know it's time for the real work. Morning chores are just warm-ups. The afternoons are where your body gets broken down like a cartwheel left out in the rain. Your first job is mucking out the stables, because of course it is. The family owns a donkey, a few goats, and the neighbour's aging draft horse, Beatrice, who spends more time chewing on fence posts than doing actual work. You don't know why she's still here. Sentimental value, maybe. She smells like wet rope and regret. You grab the pitchfork and wade into the mess. The straw is half composted already, warm and steaming in the cold air. That warmth is misleading, it smells like ammonia and despair. You work in silence, scraping the floorboards as best you can, while trying not to inhale too deeply. Your hands are already raw from cold water and rope burns, but you push through it. You have to. Every so often, Beatrice lets out a deep guttural sigh like she's disappointed in your work ethic. You sigh right back. It's the closest thing to a conversation you'll have all afternoon. This is what you were born into. Not schoolrooms and books, but boots filled with slush and a stable that needs clearing again, even though you did it yesterday. Animal waste builds up like time itself, slow, inevitable, and always your responsibility. The pitchfork's wooden handle gives you splinters, but you don't dare complain. Not here. By the time you've scraped out the last of the dung and layered in fresh straw, your back feels like someone took a spade to your spine. You stretch, but it does nothing. The pain is part of you now, as natural as breathing. Next up, hauling slop. You hate slop. It smells worse than the privy on a hot day, and looks like every food you've ever eaten got into a fist fight and lost. The bucket is heavy, sloshing with a mixture of old turnips and cabbage water, potato skins, and something unidentifiable with a greenish fuzz. The pigs don't mind, they charge the trough with the kind of energy you wish you had. They grunt and snort and shove each other, fighting over the filth like it's a feast. One pig, not your favourite, splashes a bit of the slop onto your boot. You feel it seep in, warm, sticky, definitely not going away anytime soon. You mutter under your breath and try not to gag. Just another layer to add to the scent that follows you everywhere. Here's your historical fact. Rural children in Victorian England were often expected to perform hard labour by the time that they could walk steadily. 7 was considered fair game for full-day farm work. By 10, you were practically an adult with responsibilities that could kill you. You've seen kids younger than yourself faint in the fields or get kicked by cows. No one coddles you. If you survive, you're puff. If you don't, well, there's always another mouth ready to pick up the slack. And the worst part? You don't even get paid. Not in any real sense. Your work keeps the family afloat, it feeds your siblings, it buys just enough goodwill to keep the landlord from knocking too often. That's your reward. Survival. Sometimes you hear about city kids earning factory wages, barely enough to buy a stale loaf, but still money. The idea of coins in your own pocket feels like a fantasy. You once found a farthing in the mud near the market road and kept it for 3 weeks just to look at. Eventually, you spent it on a boiled sweet and it was gone in less than a minute. Back to work. Your father calls from the top of the barn. A beam is cracked, and he needs you to help wedge a board in place before the whole thing collapses on the goat pen. You scramble up the ladder, gripping the rungs with fingers that feel like they've frozen solid. Up here, the wind cuts sharper, but the view is oddly beautiful. The fog hanging low over the pasture, the trees like skeletal fingers reaching skyward, the muddy fields stretched out like a worn quilt. You hold the board steady while your father hammers. Each strike echoes through your bones. You wince with every blow, but you don't dare let go. If the beam falls, it'll crush more than just a goat shed. It'll crush what little stability your family has. Eventually, it's done. The roof groans in protest but stays upright. Your father nods in approval. That's high praise coming from him. He doesn't say thank you, he never does, but he tosses you the last strip of dried meat from his coat pocket, and that says enough. You chew it slowly, savouring the salt, the chew, the sheer presence of protein. It's gone too fast. Here's your quirky fact. In some farming communities, kids were fed beer instead of water during long workdays. Not the strong kind, but a low-alcohol small beer considered safer than well water. You've had it. It tastes like bitter dishwater, but it doesn't kill you. Unlike the stream after a flood, which definitely will. You climb down from the barn feeling older than you should. Your hands are stained with dirt, your shirt has a fresh tear from a nail, and your legs feel like they're made of mashed potatoes. But the goats are in, the barn is upright, and the pigs are full. That's the definition of success around here. There's still more to do, there always is, but for a moment you lean against the side of the house and just breathe. The cold air bites at your nose, the sky is low and bruised. Somewhere in the distance someone's chopping wood. The rhythm is familiar, comforting even. There's a debate among scholars about child labour in Victorian rural life. Some argue it built character and resilience. Others say it was exploitation wrapped in nostalgia. You don't need a debate. You live it. You're strong, sure, but you're tired all the time. Your childhood isn't a place you'll remember fondly. It's a job you never asked for. The door creaks open. Your mother's voice calls you in to fetch kindling for the stove. You roll your shoulders, crack your knuckles, and head back in. There's no rest yet. Not until the fire's going, the chickens are in, and the last bit of daylight is wrung out of the sky. This is what work looks like for a Victorian farm child. No wages, no breaks, and no end in sight. Just the cold, the muck, and the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of surviving another day. You hear it before you see it, the coughing. Harsh, wet, and unrelenting, it echoes across the yard like a warning bell. You know the sound too well. It's your neighbour, old Mrs. Barton, hacking up her lungs again from inside that crumbling stone cottage across the lane. She's been sick for months, and somehow she's still alive, though barely. The entire village can track her condition just by the rhythm of her coughs. Today it's deeper, more gurgled. That's not good. You pause at the chopping block, axe still in hand, and tilt your head to listen. Another round of coughing, then a silence that stretches just a bit too long. You wait. Eventually the rustle of movement and a creak from her front door confirm she's still breathing. For now, in your village people die all the time. Old people, young people, even the ones who look healthy. Disease doesn't discriminate here. It just shows up, sets up camp in someone's lungs or gut and waits. Sometimes you fight it off, more often you don't. There's no ceremony to it. No dramatic moments or valiant recoveries, just a slow decline followed by a hole in the ground. You go back to splitting wood. The axe thunks through damp logs with a dull, satisfying rhythm. It's one of the few chores that gives you a sense of progress. Stacked wood means warmth. It means maybe you won't freeze tonight, or at least not all of you. You take comfort in small victories like that. Here's a grim little truth. By the mid-Victorian era, rural England was still fighting off epidemics that cities had already begun to manage. Typhoid, cholera, consumption, diphtheria, and something called the flux, which sounds like a bad joke until it hits your family and turns your privy into a danger zone. Your village has seen all of them. and they always come back. There's no real doctor here, just an apothecary who visits once a month if the roads are dry enough. He's an old man with a crooked back and a cart that smells like dead herbs and horse sweat. Mostly he sells powders, leeches, and vague advice. Keep warm, he says. Boil water, he says. Avoid the privy for a few days. Right. Very useful. Your own family's had its run-ins with illness. Last winter, your youngest brother got the fever. His skin burned for 4 days straight. Your mother didn't sleep, just sat by the fire, spooning water into his mouth and whispering prayers under her breath. He lived. Barely. But the cough never left him. Even now, a year later, he wheezes when he runs too hard, and your mum keeps an onion strung around his neck like some kind of charm. You've never dared laugh about it. And now for your quirky fact. In some parts of rural England, people believe that illness was caused by bad air. Miasma. Which is why you'll sometimes see villagers burning dried herbs or tar pitch in a pan near the door. It smells awful, like burnt socks and desperation, but they swear by it. Mrs. Barton keeps a dish of ash and lavender under her bed. She says it absorbs the death. Judging by her cough, it's slacking off. You take a break from chopping and look down at your hands. They're red and cracked. Your knuckles raw from rope burns and the constant exposure to cold and grime. Your nails are black from dirt and slivers. You can't remember the last time they were clean. Probably never. Under the filth you're still growing, at least in theory, but life doesn't allow for that kind of reflection. You hurt, you work, you sleep. Repeat. Inside the house, your mum's humming again. She always hums when she's worried. The tune is slow, almost tuneless, just a murmur in the back of her throat as she moves from one task to the next. Your little sister is curled up by the hearth, holding a rag doll with one eye and a body made of old stocking. She has a cough too, a new one. Not terrible yet, but you've learned to fear the small signs. A single cough could be nothing, or the beginning of the end. And here's the ongoing debate. Some historians argue that rural life in Victorian England, while tough, protected people from the worst diseases due to the cleaner air and smaller population density. Others point out that lack of sanitation, poor nutrition, and isolation made the countryside a slow-motion death trap during outbreaks. You've never lived in a city, but you know this. Once illness takes root here, it spreads like fire through dry straw, and no one comes to help. You think back to last summer, when your neighbour's child, Thomas, got the fever. He was 3. One day he was chasing chickens barefoot, and by the next week they were digging a hole behind the church. No priest, no flowers, just a handful of mourners and a family with one less mouth to feed. The church bell didn't even ring. Too many funerals that month already. Death here isn't loud, it's quiet. It slips in, lingers, and leaves behind blankets that still smell like the person who used to lie beneath them. You finish stacking the last of the wood and head inside, boots squelching, hands freezing. But at least you've earned a moment near the hearth. You sit, stretch your legs, and try to ignore the smoke stinging your eyes. Your mother hands you a cup of boiled water. No tea, just warmth, and you cradle it like it's worth something. Which it is. Heat, even in a mug, is currency here. The fire crackles. Your sister coughs again and your mother flinches slightly but doesn't stop humming. Outside, Mrs. Barton lets out another wheeze, followed by silence. Then a door shuts. Someone's checking on her. You're glad it's not you. You stare into the flames, letting the heat soak into your bones. For now, you're safe. For now, your lungs are clear, your body whole, and your belly not quite empty. But you know it won't last. Nothing does here. Not health, not comfort, not even the illusion of safety. Another day, another reminder that life in rural Victorian England is a long walk through a damp field with death strolling just a few paces behind you. Sunday comes with mud. You hoped for sunlight or at least a dry breeze, something that might make the day feel a little less like a burden, wrapped in wet wool. But no, the clouds hang low and sulky, and the rain that fell last night has turned the road into a squelching mess of puddles and churned up muck. You stare at your boots still damp from yesterday, and wonder if today's the day they finally give up and melt into the ground. You pull them on anyway. There's no time for hope, not when church is calling. Church isn't optional. You don't go because you want to. You go because if you don't, people talk. They'll say you're godless or worse, lazy. Your father won't have that. He's already outside, coat on, stick in hand, swearing at the geese blocking the lane. Your mother's tightening her bonnet with one hand and holding your youngest brother with the other. while muttering verses under her breath like she's trying to spiritually armour herself before facing the mudslide that leads to salvation. You head out the door, slipping immediately on the first step, catching yourself on the doorframe with a loud thud. Your knee's wet now. Of course it is. Everyone laughs, except your father, who's already 30 paces ahead and not turning around. You limp after him, scarf pulled tight over your mouth, trying not to breathe in the rich perfume of farm runoff and manure that the rain has so helpfully stirred up. The path to church is only a mile, but it feels like 10. Every step is a gamble. Your boots sink ankle deep into the sludge, and every so often you have to stop and tug one free like you're wrestling with the earth itself. Your older brother keeps pace beside you, occasionally picking burrs out of his coat and complaining about how tight his trousers are. Your sister is singing a hymn, very off-key and very loud. You envy her enthusiasm. You suspect it's just an excuse to show off that she still remembers all the words. The church rises ahead of you, a squat, moss-covered stone building with a bell tower that leans ever so slightly, as though tired of pretending it's structurally sound. The stained glass windows are mostly cracked, and the wooden doors groan when opened, as if protesting the very idea of another Sunday. The graveyard beside it is a patchwork of tilted stones and sinking mounds. You pass it with a nod, careful not to step on any of the older graves. Some superstitions are better left untested. Here's your historical fact. Victorian rural churches were more than places of worship. They were social arenas, moral checkpoints, and the only real chance for gossip outside the market. Attendance wasn't just about faith, it was about survival. Being seen at church meant you were part of the community. Not being seen meant whispers, and whispers had consequences. You slip into the pew beside your siblings, the wood cold and splintery beneath you. The air inside is no better than outside, just less wind. It smells of wet wool, unwashed bodies, candle wax and mildew. Someone near the back is coughing with the slow rhythm of approaching pneumonia. No one moves away. What would be the point? The vicar appears from behind the altar like a ghost rising from the floor. He's wearing the same robes he wears every week, stained at the sleeves, frayed at the hem, and begins with the same line he always does. His voice is steady, soothing even, like he's telling a bedtime story instead of preaching to a room full of half-starved farmers and sleep-deprived children. You try to pay attention, but the pew is hard and your legs are cramping. Your fingers are numb, your boots are leaking, and your stomach keeps reminding you that half a slice of bread and some cabbage water doesn't exactly constitute a feast. You stare at the dusty beam above the pulpit and count the spiderweb until the droning words of the sermon fade into background noise. And here's your quirky fact. In some villages, children were given sermon pennies, a small coin handed out at the end of church, if they sat quietly the whole time. Your village doesn't do that. Your father believes silence is its own reward. He once thumped your older brother on the back of the head for sneezing too loudly during the prayer. You've learned to hold yours in. It hurts. At some point the vicar shifts from God's mercy to God's wrath. Classic pivot. He scolds the congregation for drinking too much, for not attending to their elderly, for skipping prayers. You notice he skips over anything about hunger or cold or why Mrs. Barton hasn't walked without help in months. Wrath is easier to preach than compassion. Wrath doesn't cost you firewood. After the sermon there's a hymn. You sing with everyone else, but quietly. Your voice cracked once during a hymn last month, and your sister laughed so hard she nearly got smacked by Mum's hymn book. Today the singing feels slow and mournful. The words talk of light and redemption, but the melody drags like a funeral march. You see a tear slide down your mother's cheek. No one mentions it. When the final prayer is spoken and the congregation shuffles to its feet, you file out into the cold again. Outside the mud is deeper. Your boots are worse. The sky has grown darker, even though it's still early afternoon. Everyone walks back slowly, shoulders hunched like a line of penitents marching towards the gallows. Here's the scholarly debate. Some historians argue that rural churches were a source of comfort for the Victorian poor, a place of community, routine and hope. Others argue that they were tools of social control, reinforcing class divides and pushing the idea that suffering was divine will. You're not sure. Sometimes it's nice to sit in a warmish room and hear stories about heaven. Other times it just feels like another way to be told you're not trying hard enough. As you near home, your father grumbles about the mud. Your mother starts reciting the day's prayer again under her breath, and your little brother slips in a puddle and starts crying. No one picks him up. He walks the rest of the way with wet socks and a look of pure betrayal. Back inside, the fire is down to glowing coals. You add a log and sit beside it, boots off, steam rising from your feet like ghosts fleeing your skin. Your mother hangs the wet coats near the stove. Your sister plays with the rag doll. Your father mutters about the state of the world and carves something into a stick with his dull pocket knife. This is Sunday, supposedly a day of rest. But the only real rest is the moment you sink into that seat, wet and cold, and stare at the flames until your eyelids grow heavy. God may have made the Sabbath holy, but here in your village, Sunday just means cleaner shirts, louder sermons, and more mud in your boots than any other day of the week. You've barely shaken the mud off your boots from Sunday when the next reminder of your fate arrives. Marriage talk. You're not even fully dry yet. But apparently, it's time for someone to start eyeing you like livestock. It's not subtle either. Your aunt drops by unannounced, smelling of lavender water and onions, and spends the entire visit looking you over like she's inspecting a goat at market. You're chopping turnips when she says it, casually, like the weather. They say Mary Lou's boy is looking for a wife. You keep your head down, knife moving steadily through the roots, but your ears burn. You're 10, maybe 11, old enough to know what marriage means, young enough to still want to hide under the table when it comes up. It's not just idle talk either. Marriage is a practical concern around here. The age of romance is a luxury reserved for people who own real pillows and don't worry about how many mice live in their thatch. Here, love doesn't factor into it. Marriage is business. Strategic, survival-minded. 2 families combine forces, one less mouth to feed for one household, a few extra hands for the other. If feelings develop, great. If not, well, as long as you can milk a goat and carry firewood, you're marriage material. Your mother doesn't object to your aunt's suggestion. She nods thoughtfully, wiping her hands on her apron, and glances at you like you're a stew. She's hoping turns out well. You don't say anything. There's no point. You already know what she'll say. It's not like we're promising anything, just talking. But talking leads to walking, leads to rings, leads to babies. You've seen it happen. You saw it with Mary Lou herself, who got married at 14 to a man who owned his own cart and at least 3 teeth. You remember her looking terrified at the altar, hair brushed until it shone, flowers in her hand wilting from the heat. You haven't seen her smile since. You go back to chopping. The knife is dull and sticks halfway through a particularly stubborn turnip. You have to slam it down with both hands. It's good practice, you suppose, for all the other stubborn things you'll have to push through. Here's your historical fact. While the average age of marriage across Victorian England varied, it was often significantly younger in rural areas. Girls as young as 12 could legally wed with parental consent, and many did. The law didn't always reflect reality. Poverty did. A girl might be wed to a farmhand simply to lessen the burden on her parents. And boys, while often allowed a bit more time, were still expected to settle down as soon as they could support someone, even if support just meant owning a goat and having the approval of a father who didn't want him hanging around the house anymore. Your older cousin was 15 when she was married off to a boy from 2 villages over. Her dowry, 2 hens and a patchwork quilt. The hens died within a week, and the quilt got turned into baby clothes after her first child arrived 8 months later. You remember the look in her eyes when she came back for a visit, tired, resigned, and already carrying her second child on one hip. And here's your fringe fact. In some rural communities, cousin marriage wasn't just tolerated, it was preferred. Land, tools and livestock could be kept within the family, and there was less risk of dealing with outsiders who might bring debt or bad blood. You've already been told, jokingly but not really, that you might marry your second cousin Ned. He once threw a bucket at your head. You're still not over it. After your aunt leaves, you ask your mother if she was serious. She shrugs and tells you not to worry. These things work themselves out, she says, but you know what that means. It means it's already begun. Your life, once full of chores and cold stew, is now also full of watchful glances and sudden probing questions like, can you cook a proper pudding? Can you stitch? How's your milking hand? No one asks if you want to get married. No one ever does. Want has nothing to do with it. Your choices are limited. You can marry, or you can stay and become the spare daughter or spare son who sleeps by the hearth and does the washing until your teeth fall out. You've seen what happens to those ones. They never leave, they're like furniture. Always there, always useful, never the centre of attention. Aunt Maisie was one of them. She died in her 40s and had never travelled farther than the next village. There's an argument among scholars about whether rural Victorian girls and boys had more agency than we think. Some say that courtship, while pressured, was still a process, one with time, choice and a degree of freedom. Others argue that marriage in these communities was more like a trade deal than a romance. You don't need scholars to tell you how it is, you're living it. You can see the way your mothers started talking about respectable boys, and how your fathers begun measuring other families not by their character but by their pigs. Later that night, as you sit by the fire with your needle and the holy shirt your father insists isn't that bad, your mum casually mentions the Smiths. Their oldest boy, Tom, just turned 15. He's got strong shoulders, she says, stirring the pot. And his mother still has most her teeth. That says something. You nod, because what else are you going to do? Scream into your gruel? You don't hate Tom, he's decent enough, but you know him? He smells like fish guts and has a laugh like a wounded goose. You once caught him picking his teeth with a chicken feather. Romance material, clearly. And yet, as your mother talks about his family's good manners and prospects, you feel the walls close in a bit. This is what's expected. You grow up, you pair off, you produce. Your life becomes a rhythm of meals, births, deaths and chores. Your dreams shrink to fit the walls of your cottage. You finish sewing the shirt and set it aside. Your fingers are sore, the fire is low. Outside, the wind howls like a warning. You look around at your family, the walls, the fire, the same wooden spoon that's been stirring every meal since you were born. You're 11 years old, and the rest of your life has already started drafting itself. Night comes quickly here like someone snuffed out the sky. There's no gentle fading, no warm dusk, painting the hills in gold. One moment the sun is barely hanging on behind the trees, and the next, the whole world is soaked in darkness. Inside the cottage, the fire burns low and the air thickens with the smells of soot, boiled cabbage, and something faintly sour you can't quite identify. The walls creak like they're settling deeper into the ground, and your family gathers close, not for comfort, but because there's nowhere else to go. You're already in your night clothes, which is really just your day clothes minus boots and scarf. Your mother says it's wasteful to change into clean garments for bed, unless you're dying or expecting a bishop, and neither applies tonight. So you roll yourself into the same damp blanket you've used all week, stiff with smoke and flea bites, and prepare yourself for sleep. But bed is a generous word for what you're lying on. It's straw, not fresh straw, not straw from this season. This is the third or fourth life of this straw, and it smells like old animals and other people's feet. You lie on it with two of your siblings, who both manage to take up more than their share of the mat. One fidgets, the other drools. You try to find a pocket of warmth somewhere between them, but the draft sneaks in from the gap under the door, licking at your ankles. And the bed, it moves. Not just because of your siblings' restlessness, but because of the inhabitants that come alive as soon as the fire dies down. Fleas, lice, bedbugs. You feel them before you see them. A twitch on your arm, a tickle on your scalp, a slow creeping itch that blooms across your back like a rash with legs. You scratch until your skin burns. Then you scratch more. You've woken up with blood under your fingernails more than once. You've grown used to them in the way you grow used to splinters or rotten floorboards. They're part of life, like the cows or the rising damp. You know their patterns. They're worst in winter, when everyone's indoors. They bite your thighs and wrists, the soft spots. Your sister once counted 17 bites on her neck after one night. She thought it was a record. She bragged about it over breakfast. Here's your historical fact. Rural Victorian homes were a haven for vermin. Not just the bugs, but also mice, rats, and mites that thrived in thatched roofs and straw bedding. Without proper sanitation or pest control, entire families often shared their beds with swarms of parasites. In fact, people sometimes referred to their nighttime companions as the little soldiers, like it was a joke. It wasn't. You've tried everything to get rid of them, boiling the bedding when water and firewood are plentiful, which is rare, hanging the straw out in the sun, useless in winter. Your aunt swears by vinegar and goose grease. Your mother tried lavender once, but the smell faded after a day and the bugs didn't care. Sometimes in the stillest part of the night you hear the rats. They live in the walls. You haven't seen them tonight, but you've heard them. Soft scratching behind the beams, tiny squeaks, the creak of something heavy knocking over a bucket in the corner. You know the signs. You don't scream anymore. It doesn't help. You once saw one, huge and calm as anything, walking across the hearth like it paid rent. Your father hurled a boot at it. It stared at him like he was being rude. then disappeared under the floorboards. You all pretended it didn't happen. The next day the bread had a bite taken out of it. That was breakfast anyway. And now your quirky fact. Some Victorian families would actually assign a rat catcher job to one of the children, whose sole role was to wait with a club near known rat holes. Payment for a successful kill might be an extra piece of bread or a sip of elderberry wine. You've done it. You've sat by the pantry door with a stick and a bucket, listening, waiting. One time you got one, hit it right on the skull. It twitched for a while. You didn't eat dinner that night. Sleep when it finally comes isn't restful. You drift in and out, waking every time your sister kicks you or a bug crawls across your cheek. The fire burns low, then lower, until the room is thick with dark. The only sounds are breathing, snoring, and the occasional fart from someone who had too much cabbage soup. The air turns cold. You curl tighter. You dream strange things, falling into the privy, marrying your cousin, flying to a city full of lights and clean pillows. You wake at one point, certain something crawled across your foot. You sit up, heart pounding, ears straining. Nothing, or maybe something, you'll never know. You lie back down and hope it's just a dream. Never is. There's a debate among scholars about how bad nighttime vermin infestations really were in Victorian rural homes. Some argue that infestations were seasonal and manageable with herbal treatments and regular cleaning. Others point out the sheer volume of diary entries and records that describe nightly torment from biting, crawling, burrowing creatures. You side with the latter. You don't need evidence, you've got scars. Morning comes slowly, as if it's ashamed to show its face. The light creeps in through the cracked window pane, cold and grey. You feel like you haven't slept at all. Your neck is stiff. Your skin itches. Your mouth tastes like smoke and old porridge. You sit up and check for new bites. There are 3 on your leg, 1 on your collarbone. Your sister is already scratching her scalp with both hands, half asleep. You yawn, stretch, and hear something skitter in the wall. You decide to pretend it's a bird. You step into your cold trousers, pull your smock over your head, and rejoin the world of the waking, such as it is. Another night survived. Another war with the walls, the bugs, and the shadows. You didn't win, but you're still here. And in this house, that counts for something. You smell it before you see it. Thick, greasy smoke curling out of the chimney, mingling with the scent of boiling blood and singed bristle. Something big has died. But not someone. Something better. Something that squeals and grunts and once broke your toe when it rolled over in the sty. That's right, the pig is dead. And that, in this village, is what passes for a holiday. You run out of the house still half-dressed, hair sticking up like dry grass and feet crammed into boots without socks. The air is colder than you expected, but it doesn't matter. The pig is dead, which means feast week. You nearly slip in the mud rounding the corner, where half the village has already gathered near the Barton place, hands in pockets, breath fogging in the morning chill. Everyone's got that same glazed-over look. Not horror, not grief, hunger, anticipation. The same expression you'd wear before a miracle, or a roast. The pig hangs from a beam between 2 apple trees, legs tied and belly split, steam rising from its body like a saint ascending. Mr. Barton is elbow deep in the carcass, red up to his sleeves while his wife stirs a bubbling cauldron that smells complex, like metal and meat and onions if you're being generous. One of the older boys is scraping bristles off the skin with a rusty blade. The pig's face is slack, eyes half closed like it's just mildly bored with all the fuss. Your stomach growls. You haven't seen meat like this in months, maybe more. You've gnawed bones, slurped greasied broth, and once licked a pan that had held bacon a week before. But this is a treasure. One pig's death means a full week of eating, real eating, meat on your tongue, fat between your teeth, salted cuts for the winter, crackling, sausage, blood pudding. Now for your historical fact. Pigs were the most commonly raised meat animals for the Victorian rural poor. Unlike cows, which were expensive, big, and a long-term investment, a pig could live on scraps and mud, grow fast, and when slaughtered, feed a family, or 3 for weeks. The entire process, from gutting to rendering the fat, was done by hand and often shared by neighbours. It was messy, it was brutal, it was essential. The older women are already laying out the parts, trotters, jowls, the head with one cloudy eye still staring off into the sky. The organs will be used, every one of them. The intestines will be cleaned and used for sausage casing. The fat will be rendered into lard, even and the bones will be boiled down until they surrender the last of their essence. You hover near the action, hoping someone will hand you something to do, or better, something to chew, and then, like a prayer answered, Mrs. Barton waves a bloodied ladle in your direction. "Go fetch the salt," she says, pointing toward her kitchen. You sprint like your life depends on it, splash through the puddle near the gate and snatch the wooden box from the larder shelf. It's heavy and damp and smells like the sea, but when you deliver it, she gives you a smile, and more importantly, a small chunk of cooked pig liver, still warm, slightly rubbery, and covered in what might be dried thyme. You bite in like it's cake. It's not, but it's meat, and that's enough. The flavour is rich, earthy, metallic. You chew with your eyes closed, blocking out the noise, the steam, the blood. This is joy, in its gristly, visceral form. Here's your quirky fact. Some Victorian families celebrated the pig slaughter with a toast of warm beer, or even a small dance around the fire. Not as superstition, but as ritual. The pig was often treated like a member of the family, given a name, fed daily, sometimes even spoken to until the day of its death. Then all sentiment vanished. It was food now, the cycle complete. By afternoon, the sun has pushed through the clouds, weak but steady, and the whole yard smells like cooking flesh. Children are laughing, men are pretending not to be queasy, and the dogs are losing their minds trying to steal bits of bone. Your sister is standing by the steaming bucket where someone's boiling the blood for pudding. She looks pale. You offer her a chunk of fried fat. She declines. Later the feast begins. Not the full one, but the first taste, crackling, still popping from the pan. Bits of fat back, salted and fried. Strips of skin boiled down into a kind of chewy ribbon that sticks in your teeth but goes down smooth. No plates, just hands, wooden bowls, torn bread. You eat too fast. Everyone does. No one talks, just chews. Your father says something about how this is living, but no one responds. They are too busy trying not to moan out loud. There's a scholarly debate, of course there is, about how much protein rural families really had access to. Some say these feasts were rare, once or twice a year, and that for most of the time people lived on starches and broth. Others argue that many families had a steady, if small, supply of animal protein: rabbits, pigeons, chickens and milk. You think both sides are half right. It's not about how often you eat meat, it's about how long you remember it afterward. You remember your last pork meal with the eerie clarity. It was last spring at another slaughter, and you got a piece of heart stew so tender you nearly cried. You thought about it for days. You dreamed about it. You wrote a poem in your head. You don't remember any actual holidays that vividly. As night falls, the work winds down. The fire spits and hisses, fat dripping into the flames. Smoke clings to your clothes and your hair, and you can feel the grease on your skin like a second coat. You don't care. You're full. Full enough to lie down and not think about how cold the floor is, or how many bugs are waiting for you in the straw. You've got meat in your belly, salt on your lips, and tomorrow promises more. Because tomorrow comes the blood pudding, the sausages, the pies, the preserved cuts for winter, hung up to dry and smoked over weeks. You'll help stuff the casings, turn the crank on the grinder, sweep up the bones, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get another bite or two before it's all packed away. For now, though, you sit by the fire with your hands still smelling like lard and ash, and your eyes slowly closing. The pig is dead. Long live the pig. The pig is gone now, cut, salted, cured, boiled, and buried deep in your stomach, but you still feel the warmth of that feast lingering, like a fading memory you can taste. It was glorious, it was greasy, it was over. And now, as expected, someone in the house is ill. Not just sniffling or wheezing, a real illness. The kind that settles in the chest like a rock and rattles the lungs like loose coins in a tin. Your younger sister hasn't risen from bed since last night. Her face is pale, shiny with sweat, and her breathing sounds like wind trying to squeeze through cracked shutters. The air around her smells faintly sweet, like sickness pretending to be something softer. Your mother sits beside her, dabbing her forehead with a rag soaked in vinegar, and muttering half prayers under her breath. The same lines she repeats when she's hoping God is busy with bigger things. There's no doctor. There is a doctor, technically, but he's 5 miles away and charges more than you own. You once saw him arrive in a wagon pulled by 2 horses, coat lined with rabbit fur, boots that actually matched. He examined old Mr. Crawley's leg and declared it beyond help, then charged a shilling for the news. Mr. Crawley's leg is buried behind the church now. The rest of him followed a month later. No one's called the doctor since. Your mother swears by a thick syrup made of boiled licorice root and burnt sugar, so that's what she gives your sister now, forcing a few sticky spoonfuls between her chapped lips. Your sister doesn't wake, just swallows automatically, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven puffs. You try not to stare. You know better than to ask, is she going to be all right? Because the answer is always the same. We'll see. You hate that answer. It feels like waiting for someone to finish a sentence that never comes. Now for your historical fact. Medical care in rural Victorian England was often completely out of reach for the poor. Hospitals were rare and usually located in towns, while country folk relied on home remedies, prayer and the occasional visit from a midwife or apothecary. Doctors were a last resort not just due to cost, but because their treatments, bloodletting, mercury pills and blistering agents, were often as dangerous as the illness itself. Your mum sends you out to find old Nan. She's not a real healer, not in the official sense, but she knows things. Plants, poultices, charms, and the precise way to tie a rag around a wrist to keep away night sweats. Her cottage is tucked at the edge of the woods, low to the ground and hidden beneath ivy and smoke. It always smells like something is cooking, though what that something is varies wildly between hopeful and terrifying. You knock. She opens the door before your hand even drops. "I heard," she says simply, already wrapping her shawl tighter. She has eyes like a fox and a voice like a broom being dragged across stone. She grabs her basket and follows you back through the mud, muttering to herself about lungwort and slippery elm. Inside she wastes no time. She pokes and prods your sister's chest, lifts her eyelids, sniffs the air. She nods to herself, then pulls out a jar filled with something that looks like pond water and smells worse. 2 spoonfuls every hour, she says, and keep her warm. She'll either sweat it out or she won't. That's as close as you get to a diagnosis. She leaves a bundle of herbs, a jar of black salve and a warning. No cold drafts, no fright, no meat until her fever breaks. Your mother nods solemnly, as if she hadn't just fed the girl a strip of pork belly yesterday morning. Here's your quirky fact. Some rural healers believe that placing a slice of bacon on the soles of the feet could draw out a fever. Others use spiders mashed into butter as a cure for seizures. Nan doesn't do that, at least you hope not. You're still not sure what was in the last salve she gave your cousin when his skin turned greenish. You sleep poorly that night. Your bed is cold, but the air inside the house is thick with heat. The fire has been stoked high, the windows shut tight. The scent of sweat and boiled herbs clings to the walls. Your mother snores softly in her chair. The baby fusses. Your sister coughs, a dry, papery sound that rattles and fades. You lie awake staring at the ceiling, imagining the sickness spreading like mould in bread, slow, silent, irreversible. You wonder who it will reach next. There's always a risk. It moves through houses like smoke, illness. Sometimes you wake up and half the village is coughing. Sometimes you go to sleep and wake up to a funeral. It's just part of the cycle. Life, work, sickness, death, repeat. And here's the scholarly debate. Some argue that rural communities were more resilient in the face of illness. Stronger immune systems from constant exposure, cleaner air, fewer people packed into small spaces. Others argue that malnutrition, poor hygiene and isolation made rural people more vulnerable. You don't know which is true, you only know that your sister is still breathing, and that feels like something to hold on to. In the morning she wakes, just barely. Her lips are dry and her eyes look like stones under ice, but she asks for water. You nearly cry. Your mother actually does cry, though she pretends it's just the smoke in her eyes. Nan's syrup worked, maybe, or the fever broke on its own, or it's just the eye of the storm. Either way, you're not celebrating yet. You help your mother change the straw in your sister's bed, wipe down her face, bring her a bit of weak tea and a sliver of oatcake soaked in broth. She doesn't say much, but she chews slowly, her fingers are trembling. You sit beside her, watch her breathe. It's shallow but steady. The pig is gone, the feast is over. Illness has come and settled in the corners of your home like damp, waiting for another chance. But for now, your sister is awake, and that's enough. The only time work truly stops around here is when someone dies. And even then, it's not so much a pause as a brief slowing down, a kind of respectful shuffling of feet before you go right back to pulling turnips or chopping wood with the news still fresh in your throat. Death is so common in your village that it barely registers anymore, not because it doesn't hurt, but because there's no space for what comes after. Grief takes time, and time is a luxury you can't afford. You find out mid-morning, old Mrs. Barton has died. For real this time, not just a bad spell or a few rough coughs. She's gone. Her niece found her sitting in her chair by the fire. eyes half-lidded, shawl still draped over her shoulders like she'd only just nodded off. The whole village had been expecting it for months, but when it finally happens, it still feels strange. Not like a shock, more like the end of a long sentence. Your mother hears the news from a neighbour passing by with a cartload of onions. She nods slowly, then crosses herself and sighs. "I'll make something for the table," she says, already turning back toward the kitchen. "You don't ask who the table is for, you know how this goes." Death in the village is always followed by food, and not because anyone has much to spare, but because ritual demands it. Someone will dig a hole, someone will find a priest, someone will find the nice candle. Yes, the candle, the one saved for exactly this. And you, lucky you, will get a half-day reprieve from chores to stand in the freezing churchyard and think about how you'll probably die the same way. Quietly, without warning, and in a chair that smells like moths. You go with your mother to the Barton house around noon, carrying a basket of stale oatcakes and a jar of apple chutney that's more vinegar than fruit. You're not even sure if anyone's still eating in that house, but that's not the point. Bringing food is how you show you care without saying anything. No one here is good with words, so you hand over a jar, pat a shoulder, and say shame, or poor thing, or she were kind. That's all there is. Inside the cottage, the air is warm and still, too still. The curtains are drawn and a single candle burns in the centre of the table, flickering slightly as people move in and out. The body is upstairs, but no one says that. They just talk around it. One of the younger Bartons is crying quietly into a handkerchief. Another is already arguing with her brother about who's getting the good teapot. Life and death share a room here. Here's your historical fact. Funerals in Victorian rural England were community affairs, no matter how poor you were. Even families with nothing scraped together enough for a coffin, a minister, and a small meal afterward. Death was public and practical. Mourning clothes were a luxury. So often, certain people just wore their cleanest shirt and tied a bit of black ribbon to an armband. Sometimes, if a family was especially strapped, they'd borrow mourning clothes from a neighbour and return them after the burial. You don't have mourning clothes. None of you do. Your shirt has a rip under the sleeve and your boots still smell like pig slop. But no one cares. You stand in the corner, chewing the edge of a dry oatcake, listening to the older women whisper about how she went peaceful and never said a word, and thank God it weren't messy. You nod along even though no one's talking to you. By afternoon, the body is carried down the stairs by 4 men, your father among them, each gripping a corner of the homemade coffin. It's just plain boards, nailed together roughly, but there's something solemn about it. They walk slowly through the village, past the butcher's, past the smithy, down the muddy path to the church. You and the rest follow behind in a shuffling line, heads bowed, coats pulled tight against the wind. You don't cry. You liked Mrs. Barton well enough. She once gave you a sweet for helping her lift a pot, but grief doesn't show itself in tears here. It shows in silence, in the way your neighbours walk slower, stand straighter, don't complain. That's how you know someone mattered. People stop grumbling for a few hours. Here's your quirky fact. Some rural communities believed in death watchers, people who'd sit with the body overnight to keep away evil spirits or ensure the soul passed peacefully. The Bartons didn't bother with that. Or maybe they did and no one told you. Either way, it feels like the kind of thing that's fading. Like too many other things, the burial is short. The priest says something about dust and ashes and paradise, and the coffin is lowered into the ground with only 2 ropes and a lot of grunting. The hole was dug this morning and the earth is wet, sticking to everyone's boots like it wants to keep them too. You try not to look at the bottom of the grave, it's just dark down there. Too dark. Afterward, you gather in the tiny church hall, where someone's laid out a table of cold tea, limp bread, and the odd bit of pie crust. You eat because it's there. Your stomach doesn't know the difference between a funeral and a feast. Someone tells a joke softly, and a few people chuckle. Life seeps back in slowly. There's a scholarly debate about how rural communities processed grief in the Victorian era. Some say they suppressed it, stoicism, duties, the stiff upper lip. Others argue that their rituals, though simple, were deeply meaningful and gave people a sense of control in a chaotic world. You're not sure what's true. All you know is that people cry less than you'd expect and laugh more than you'd think they're allowed to. You walk home as the sun dips below the hills, sky streaked with grey and rust. Your boots are caked in mud, your hands smell like vinegar, and your mind keeps drifting back to that room, the candle, the silence. You wonder if anyone will remember you when it's your turn, if they'll bring chutney, if they'll argue over your coat. Back home, your mother sets the kettle on the fire. Your sister, still pale from her fever, lies curled in the corner with her doll. Your father sits sharpening his blade, his expression unreadable. No one speaks of Mrs. Barton again, but you will, at least for a while. You'll remember the way she always squinted when she smiled, the way she never flinched when the rats scurried past her feet, the way she gave you that boiled sweet, even though she only had 3 left. Another hole in the ground. Another chair left empty. Another brief day off to remind you how short and soft your time really is. The frost came in overnight, sly and silent, like a thief creeping into a sleeping house. When you step outside in the morning, the ground crunches underfoot, and your breath spills out in puffs, thick enough to cut with a knife. You blink against the cold. It stings your eyes and finds the tiny cracks in your boots, the ones you tried to plug with wax and string. Didn't work. Your toes are already numb. You wiggle them to make sure they're still attached. It's late autumn now, nearly winter, and everything feels brittle. The trees are bare, their spindly branches like clawed fingers pointing at nothing in particular. The grass has gone from green to a sickly brown, and the mud has frozen into solid ruts where your boots used to sink. The laundry your mum hung out yesterday is stiff as planks, sleeves frozen in mid-flap like they gave up halfway through, waving goodbye. Your breath smells faintly sour, onions maybe, or sleep, and your fingers sting inside their half mittens. Someone's already lit the fire, and smoke curls lazily from the chimney. That's the only warmth in sight. You sigh, pull your threadbare coat tighter, and head toward the woodpile. There's no such thing as a lazy winter morning. The wood is frozen too. You can feel it in your arms as you lift each log, heavier, harder, resistant. The axe is buried in a split stump from yesterday. It takes both hands and a good stomp to wrench it free. The handle is cold enough to burn your skin, but you've learned not to let go. If you don't chop now, the fire goes out. If the fire goes out, the cold comes in. Here's your historical fact. In rural Victorian England, the cold was more than just uncomfortable. It was deadly. Homes were poorly insulated, fireplaces inefficient, and entire families often relied on a single room's heat to survive. Frostbite was common, and respiratory illnesses flourished in the damp, unheated air. Children, the elderly, and the sick were especially vulnerable. Losing a toe or two to the cold wasn't uncommon. Neither was losing a whole sibling. You remember the winter 3 years ago when the boy down the lane, Eddie, froze in his bed. He was only 5, sharing a blanket with his grandmother, and still didn't make it through the night. People said he looked peaceful, like he was dreaming of summer. That was supposed to be comforting. You didn't sleep for 3 nights afterward, clutching your knees to your chest and blowing hot air into your fists like it would matter. This year feels colder already. The wind has an edge to it, sharp and unforgiving. It snakes through the smallest cracks in the walls, turns blankets into sieves, and steals the heat from your bones faster than you can make more. Last night you slept in your coat, hat, and 2 pairs of socks, and still woke up shivering so hard your teeth knocked together. You pause to catch your breath, and that's when you notice the blood. Just a small spot on the tip of your finger, cracked skin opening like a flower. The cold does that, makes your hand split open. You suck the finger on instinct, tasting iron and salt and wood dust. Your mother calls from inside, asking for kindling. You grab an armload of sticks and trudge back toward the house, boots thudding on the hard ground. Inside, the fire is sputtering, but the room is warmer than the outside, which is the only metric that matters. You dump the wood near the hearth and sit down, hands extended, watching the flame lick at the logs like a starving thing. Your sister is curled up nearby, still wrapped in the blanket she hasn't left in 3 days. Her cough is back. Not as bad as before, but enough to remind everyone it never really left. Your mum checks her forehead and frowns. You think she's hoping it's just the cold. You're hoping she's right. And now, your quirky fact. Some Victorians believed you could ward off frostbite by tying a red thread around your ankles or wrists, red being the colour of heat, blood and vitality. You tried it once, your fingers still froze, but you kept the thread. It's tied around the base of your bootlaces now, fraying and stiff, but somehow comforting. Breakfast is a slice of bread hard as a roof tile, dipped in hot water and sprinkled with salt. It's warm. That's all you pastoru care about. You eat slowly, chewing each bite like it might be your last. Your mother hands around cups of boiled water with a single curl of dried mint dropped in. It tastes faintly of tea and mostly of steam. Still, it helps. Your father doesn't say much, he's already planning the day in his head. You know the look. There's a dead tree to chop, a loose shutter to fix, and the chimney's starting to smoke again. The moment you finish your last bite of bread, he grunts and jerks his cool head toward the door. Time to get moving. There's a scholarly debate, as always, about how rural families endured the cold. Some suggest that shared bedding, thick woolens and nightly fires were enough to keep people safe. Others argue that the rural poor suffered deeply, sleeping in damp straw, eating too little, and freezing slowly from the inside out. You don't need a book to tell you which is true. You can feel it in your bones, in the aching of your knees, in the way your breath fogs even inside the house. By midday the sun is out but useless. It looks warm but offers nothing, just a pale suggestion of light smeared across a frozen sky. You spend the afternoon hauling water from the half-frozen well. The bucket handle burning your skin with every trip, the rope creaks like it's ready to snap. You pray it doesn't. You don't have a spare. By the time you finish your chores, your feet feel like lumps of wood, your fingers are too numb to make a fist, and your nose hasn't stopped running since breakfast. You huddle by the fire again, closer this time, until the heat reaches your marrow. You watch a log collapse into coals, listen to the hiss and snap, and try not to think about tomorrow. Because tomorrow will be just as cold, maybe colder. The wind will return, or the snow will start, or the well will freeze over completely. You'll wake with your eyelashes stuck together and frost tracing the inside of the window pane. And you'll do it all again, but for now, you stretch out your fingers and press them against the hearth bricks. The skin sizzles slightly, too close, but you don't pull away. You want to feel something, anything, even pain. Winter in the village doesn't arrive like a storm, it settles in, quietly, completely, and without mercy. It doesn't care who you are or what you've done, just waits, and slowly it takes. You don't get bored often. Boredom is a luxury reserved for people with choices, and you don't have many. But today, after the wood's been chopped, the slop bucket scrubbed, the ashes shoveled, and the pigs kicked into silence, you find yourself in that rare, dangerous stretch of time where no one has a task ready for you. The kind of lull where the mind wanders, the body slows, and you start to wonder what to do next in a world where fun is a concept people in novels talk about. You sit on the fence post outside the barn, kicking your heels and watching a snail creep across the muddy path with the sort of patience only a creature with no predators and zero ambition can afford. You feel envy it. You could spend hours doing nothing and no one would call it noble, but the snail, everyone just shrugs and calls it nature. Your younger brother approaches, face smudged with soot and hair pointing in several directions. He's holding a stick like a sword and without even asking jabs you in the knee. "Dragon," he says solemnly, and jabs again. You sigh. This is what passes for entertainment. Pretend violence and cold dirt. You grab your own stick, one with a slight curve to it, and swipe it at his ankles. "Witch hunter," you reply. It's a running joke. Your older cousin once told a tale about a child who grew up to slay witches with nothing but a birch branch. The story has stuck, mostly because it's the only heroic narrative you've ever been able to imagine yourself into. Not a soldier, not a knight, just a grubby kid with a stick and a suspicious stare. Your brother cackles and runs off. You chase him through the yard, weaving around the rain barrel and ducking under the laundry line, both of you screaming in the high-pitched feral way only children with no toys can manage. It feels good. Your body is tired, yes, but you're alive, moving, not freezing or working, just existing. You collapse near the edge of the garden, panting, the stick now forgotten in the grass. Your fingers are muddy, your breath visible in the chilly air, and your brother is laughing so hard he might puke. It's not much, but it's something. Now here's your historical fact. Most rural Victorian children had no designated time for play. There was no such thing as recreation in the way we understand it today. Play happened between chores, and the materials were whatever you could find: sticks, stones, old bones, scraps of fabric. Games were invented on the spot, passed between children like folk songs and often centred around the harsh realities of their world. Catching rats, mimicking adults, pretending to die of illness. Yes, really. You and your siblings once played funeral. Your younger sister lay in a box, eyes closed, while everyone took turns eulogising her with lines like, "She was kind, she never stole my bread." It was all very respectful, till she sneezed and ruined the mood. Entertainment doesn't come from outside here, it comes from your own desperation. You've made puppets from old turnips, tried to build a raft from barn scraps which promptly sank, and once attempted to create a play using only your dog, 2 buckets, and a candle. The dog ate the script. Sometimes in the evening your mum hums old folk tunes while darning socks, and if you're really lucky, your father might tell a story by the fire. He's not much of a performer, mostly mumbles and forgets who the hero is halfway through, but there's something comforting in the rhythm of his words. Last week he told a story about a giant who kidnapped cows by hiding inside a storm. You're pretty sure he made it up on the spot, but you still dreamt about it for 3 nights. Here's your quirky fact. Some rural folk believe that if you laugh too much during winter, it could summon misfortune. God don't like grinning when there's frost on the windows, your grandmother used to say, so after every fit of laughter, there's a beat of quiet. Just in case. You and your brother sit in that beat now, listening to the wind whistle through the barn and wondering if your joy has tempted fate. There's a debate among scholars, of course there is, about whether children in rural communities were truly deprived of joy, or if their lives were just different. Some say kids found happiness in simplicity, that they didn't miss what they didn't know. Others argue that constant labour and lack of stimulation left deep emotional scars. You think both sides are right and wrong. There's joy, yes, but it's never safe. It's a joy you have to steal. One eye always on the door, listening for your name being called to fetch water or chase a chicken or bury a dead something. Later in the day, you help your sister weave scraps of thread into a lopsided bracelet. She's trying to make one for everyone in the family, but she's only got 3 colours of thread and 2 of them are almost gone. She ties it around your wrist with such ceremony you feel like royalty. A muddy, half-starved monarch of a crumbling kingdom, but royalty all the same. You offer to make her one, but yours comes out knotted and crooked. She wears it anyway. Says it's a dragon's tail, you believe her. Evening sets in, and you find yourself back at the fence post, this time alone. The snail is gone, or maybe someone stepped on it. The world is quieter again, colder. Your breath fogs in front of you, and the sky turns orange, then purple, then grey. The day is done. You had a moment, a game, a laugh. That's more than some. Inside, your father is grumbling about the price of coal, and your mother is stirring something that smells like boiled despair. But your wrist is warm with the thread your sister tied, and your boots are dry for once. No one's asked you to do anything in the last 10 minutes. You smile, just a little. They call her the herb woman. Not to her face, of course. Most people are too superstitious for that. But behind closed doors, in low voices, always followed by a look over the shoulder. Old Nan, Widow Pritchard, the wise woman, the witch. She's all of those and none of them, depending on the weather and who's recently come down with something mysterious. And today, you're on your way to see her. Again, your sister's cough returned in the night. Low and wet and oddly rhythmic, like it's trying to set itself to music. She's pale, won't eat, and keeps muttering about the goat being in her bed. There is no goat in her bed. So now you're clutching a small linen pouch of dried nettle leaves and a few coppers your mother scraped from the bottom of her sewing box. Trudging down the muddy path toward the crooked house on the edge of the woods, the path itself is like something out of a folk tale. Gnarled tree roots, mossy stones, and a particular bend where birds stop singing for no reason at all. You don't mind the walk. You like the quiet. And you like Nan, in your own wary way. She smells like wet herbs and burnt sugar, and she always offers you something strange to chew on. Once it was candied violet root. Another time, a lump of tree resin she swore would strengthen your lungs. It just made your jaw ache. Her cottage appears through the trees, sagging as usual, roof thick with moss, smoke curling lazily from the crooked chimney. She keeps chickens that may or may not lay eggs anymore, and an enormous black dog with one eye, and a name no one uses because he doesn't answer to it anyway. He watches you approach, doesn't move, just growls softly as you pass. A formality. The door creaks open before you can knock. "You're back," Nan says, not surprised. She never is. You think she listens to the wind or talks to birds. Or maybe she just knows your family that well. "Your sister, then?" You nod, hand outstretched with the pouch. She doesn't take it. Instead, she waves you inside. The interior is what you'd expect if you'd read too many stories. Dark wooden beams, bundles of dried plants hanging from every possible surface, bottles filled with liquids in shades of green, brown and black. It smells earthy and sharp, like someone boiled the forest down to its essence and bottled it. The air buzzes faintly, like it's alive. She takes the pouch from your hand at last, mutters something under her breath. Prayer or complaint, hard to say, and starts gathering things. She moves like someone who hasn't stopped moving in decades, swishing through shadows with speed and certainty. You watch her fill a cloth with powders, dried bark, and something that looks suspiciously like beetle shells. She wraps it tight, ties it with a blue ribbon, and hands it to you. Deep it, then pour it over her feet, she says. Don't let her talk while it soaks, or the fever will stay in her throat. You nod like you understand. You don't, but you'll do it anyway. Now here's your historical fact before the widespread establishment of rural clinics or trained district nurses. Most medical care in Victorian villages came from women like Nan, herbalists, midwives, charmers. Their knowledge was passed down through generations and blended old folk remedies with natural medicine. While some of their cures were useful, willow bark for pain, lavender for sleep, others bordered on the theatrical or downright dangerous. Nan once gave your mother a powder for stomach cramps that smelled like rotten apples. It worked, apparently, though your mum didn't stop sweating for a full day. Another time she gave your brother a paste for his infected toe. It turned green, then black, then healed. You still don't know if that was the intended order. You thank her. She grunts in return. Just before you leave, she presses something small and round into your hand. Keep it under your pillow, she says. Keeps the nightmares out. You look down. It's a dried berry, hard as stone. You nod again. You're not about to question her. Here's your quirky fact. In parts of rural England, people believed nightmares were caused by mare spirits, phantom women who sat on your chest while you slept. To ward them off, people placed things under their pillows. Bread crusts, garlic, tiny iron nails. Nan's berry isn't the strangest thing you've ever seen. Your cousin once slept with a dead toad in a pouch under her bed, swore it kept her dreams clean. You walk home slowly, pouch tucked under your coat, eyes flicking toward every bird that flutters out of the brush. The woods feel closer now, like they're listening. You wouldn't be surprised if Nan is part of the woods somehow. Maybe she was the forest once and decided to take human form just to get a closer look at the rest of you. By the time you get home, the sky's gone grey again. The wind bites through your coat and your ears ache. Inside, your sister is still curled in the corner, shivering. Your mother takes the bundle without a word, begins boiling water. You sit nearby, trying not to look hopeful. You place the berry under your blanket, just in case. There's a scholarly debate, naturally, about the legitimacy of these rural healers. Some view them as untrained meddlers, perpetuating superstition and delaying real treatment. Others argue they were crucial, bridging the gap between formal medicine and people who had no other options. You've seen Nan's work up close. She's odd, yes, and her recipes are 1 part science to 2 parts guesswork, but she listens. And in a place where no one else does, that matters. You soak your sister's feet in the steep-paid potion. The water turns brown and the smell is overpowering, like mouldy hay and burnt sugar. She doesn't speak, just sits there, face slack, eyes closed. After a while, her breathing evens. She falls asleep before the water cools. You don't move her, just cover her with the extra shawl and sit beside her until your legs go numb. That night you don't dream of the goat. You don't dream of the pig or the cold or your own funeral. You sleep heavy and dreamless. When you wake up, the berry is still under your pillow and your sister is still breathing. Maybe that's magic. Or maybe it's just Nan. Either way, you'll take it. There's a smell that follows you through the village. A smell you can't scrub out, wash away, or even fully describe. It's not one single odour. It's a bouquet of unpleasantness. A layered, aged, and deeply personal funk that settles into your clothes, clings to your hair, and nests behind your ears like a gremlin made of mildew. You stink. And so does everyone else. And the worst part, you're used to it. You first notice it again this morning while pulling on your shirt. The same one you wore yesterday and the day before, and probably 3 days before that too. It hits your nose in a warm wave. Sweat, smoke, maybe a bit of stew, and something else that defies identification. Your boots smell like feet, obviously, but also like wet dog and possibly pig slop from last week. You could try scrubbing them with a stick and cold water, but why bother? Everything smells the same again by sundown. You sniff under your arm just to check. Immediate regret. That was a mistake. You don't even flinch anymore. Just sigh and finish getting dressed. Cleanliness isn't a goal. It's a memory. Washing as a concept exists. Bathing, however, does not. There is no bathtub, there is no running water. The bath is a metal tub in the middle of the kitchen that gets filled maybe once every 2 weeks, if it's warm enough and no one's ill. The youngest go first. By the time it's your turn, the water looks like someone used it to rinse a chimney. Today is not bath day. Instead, your mother hands you a damp rag, already grey with yesterday's grime, and tells you to wipe your face and neck like a Christian. You comply, scrubbing behind your ears with the enthusiasm of someone sentenced to a lifetime of almost clean. It's better than nothing, but not much. Here's your historical fact. In Victorian rural England, most people bathed infrequently, once a week at best, once a season at worst. Soap was expensive and handmade, often harsh, and saved for hands and laundry rather than whole body use. Many families shared the same bathwater to conserve resources, and hot water was a luxury, not a given. Sunday best often referred to clothes that were at least dry and aired out, not necessarily clean. You've used the same bar of soap, brown, grainy, and smelling vaguely of lard for months. It lives in a tin on the hearth and is considered too valuable to waste. Once your sister tried to use it to wash her doll. The resulting punishment is still whispered about like a cautionary tale. You know you stink, everyone does. It's not personal, it's cultural. The whole village exists in a haze of unwashed wool, coal smoke, rotting vegetables, and human musk. The butcher smells like blood, the blacksmith smells like sweat and iron, the preacher smells like damp books and disappointment. No one is exempt. Even the wealthier families, who might bathe more often or in perfumed water, still carry the lingering scent of their environment. Dirt doesn't discriminate. You once asked your mother why no one talks about it. Because there's nothing to say, she told you. We all smell and we've got work to do. End of discussion. Your best attempt at fresh is rubbing crushed mint or lavender under your arms, if it's growing, and hoping it masks something. It never does. You've also tried dusting your scalp with flour as advised by your aunt, who claims it absorbs oil. It does. It also makes your head smell like bread dough after an hour in the sun. Here's your quirky fact. In some rural traditions, people used urine as a cleaning agent, known as lant, to bleach fabric, scrub floors, and even clean hair. Supposedly, the ammonia broke down grease. You haven't tried that. Yet. But when things get desperate, who knows? The only time anyone smells good around here is weddings and funerals. At weddings, someone might break out a drop of rosewater, which gets dabbed behind ears like liquid gold. At funerals, everyone tries to air out their coats before putting them on, though it usually just results in the scent of mould and mourning. Your mother says she once smelled a woman who wore real perfume, said it made her eyes water and her head spin. Too much of a good thing, she said, like stuffing your nose into a pie and trying to breathe. You're not sure you'd mind. Even your hair has given up. It hangs limp, matted at the back where you sleep and crisp at the ends from the heat of the hearth. Brushing is an event. The family shares 2 combs, one with teeth missing, the other prone to splintering. You've cried during brushing before. Everyone has. It's just another morning routine. There's a scholarly debate, because of course there is, about whether Victorians truly believed in hygiene as we know it today. Some say the poor understood the importance of cleanliness, but were limited by resources. Others argue that concepts of hygiene were radically different, focused more on visible dirt than bacteria. You believe both. People want to be clean, but when you're choosing between firewood and hot water, the water can wait. You spot a neighbour across the fence dumping a bucket of grey water near the ditch. She waves. You wave back. She's wearing a dress you've seen every Sunday for the past year. The colour used to be blue. Now it's the colour of clouds on laundry day. You've probably smelled each other at your worst. There's no shame in it. You're all swamp creatures together. Sometimes you fantasize about being clean. Really clean. Scrubbed raw in a hot bath. Wrapped in fresh linen. Your hair combed until it shines. It feels decadent, otherworldly. You imagine how it must feel to walk down the road and have someone turn and say, "You smell nice." That's the kind of dream you tuck under your pillow next to the dried berry from Nan. Instead, you rewrap your scarf, still damp from yesterday's rain and smelling vaguely of goat, and head out the door. The sun's up. The chickens need feeding. The mud is thicker than usual. You'll be elbow deep in manure by midday and sweating through your shirt by noon. By evening, you'll add another layer of stink to the tapestry. So it goes. You smell. Everyone smells. But you're alive. And sometimes you laugh so hard you forget. Sometimes you run in the wind and the stink flies off for a moment. Sometimes your sister wraps her arms around you and doesn't flinch. And that in this world is as close to perfume as it gets. The fair arrives without warning, like a fever dream on a cloudy day. One moment, It's just another muddy Tuesday with chickens pecking at your boots and the wind trying to remove your ears. Then, without so much as a trumpet or a poster, wagons start rolling in over the ridge. Tall ones with painted wheels, bent ones with patched canvas, carts overflowing with barrels and rope, and something that smells distinctly of burnt sugar and livestock. The air changes. Not in temperature, but in possibility. You hear the shouting first, stallholders barking about sweets, spices, wool, trinkets, and real Turkish figs. You have no idea what a Turkish fig is. You want one anyway. You run down the lane, slipping in puddles, your scarf trailing behind you like a loose tail. The fair only comes once or twice a year, and when it does, everything else stops. The village green transforms into a living thing, a chaotic knot of tents. Stalls, shouting men, shrieking children, bleating goats, and cackling women. There are men juggling knives with faces so lined they look carved. A boy no older than you swallows fire to a cheering crowd. Someone's selling eels. Someone else has a monkey on a chain that picks pockets as fast as it dances. It's everything you've ever wanted to see, and it's also absolutely disgusting. There's mud everywhere, and not just regular mud, fair mud. Trampled in, food-soaked, possibly blood-streaked mud. Your boots are swallowed within minutes. A rat scurries across your foot and no one even notices. You watch it with mild curiosity, then move on to the candied apples, which are red and glossy and probably coated in diseases you can't pronounce. Doesn't matter. They look divine. Of course you can't afford anything. You've got a single coin in your pocket, an old copper farthing your father gave you after 3 days of hauling wood and not complaining once. Don't spend it on something stupid, he said. So you immediately spend it on a piece of roasted barley sugar shaped like a rooster. It's sticky and sharp-edged, and the best thing you've ever put in your mouth. Here's your historical fact. Rural fairs in Victorian England were a blend of commerce and chaos. Part market, part performance, part social gathering, they were one of the only times villagers could encounter goods and people from outside their immediate world. Fairs were also notoriously rowdy, ripe with drunkenness, petty crime, and the occasional spontaneous boxing match. You see a man with no teeth trying to sell healing stones next to a booth offering love potions for a halfpenny a vial. A woman is reading palms, her hands stained with beet juice. You watch her tell a red-eyed farmer that he'll marry twice and die rich. He looks unconvinced, but hands over his coin anyway. Then you hear it. Music. Real music. Not just someone wheezing into a whistle, but music, a fiddle, a drum, and something that might be a flute or just a bird with ambition. You follow the sound and find a small crowd gathered around a group of travelling performers. They wear bright, threadbare clothes and move like dancers, even when they're standing still. One of them juggles flaming pins while telling a story about a king who turned into a wolf. The crowd laughs at all the right parts. You don't understand half of it, but it doesn't matter. It feels like magic. You try not to get too close. You're not dressed for magic. Your trousers are too short. Your coat smells like cabbage, and you've got hay in your socks. But you stand on the edge of the crowd and let the sound soak into your bones. You could stay like this for hours. Here's your quirky fact. At some Victorian fairs, mock trials were held, where villagers would drag someone onto a makeshift stage and pretend to prosecute them for absurd crimes, like stealing the moon, or tickling pigs without consent. The accused would deliver a theatrical defence, and the audience would vote on the sentence. Most punishments involved pies to the face or being dunked in a barrel. You wish your village had one of those. You already have a list of people you'd nominate. But the sun starts to set. The fair doesn't slow down, it erupts. More shouting, more drinking, more stomping. The men gather near the ale tent, voices rising with each round. Your father is among them now, standing tall, laughing too loud. He hasn't looked that relaxed in weeks. Your mother is nearby, bartering with a seller for a bolt of cloth. She doesn't notice you watching her. For once, she looks like she belongs to a different world, a brighter one. Then come the fights. They always do. Someone says the wrong thing, someone else throws a punch. A barrel topples, a bench breaks. It's like a ritual, blood sacrifice to end the celebration. You back away quickly as 2 men tumble into a sack of turnips. A woman screams. A child cries. The monkey throws something that might be dung. There's a scholarly debate, because of course, about whether these rural fairs were vital cultural events or just disruptive carnivals of bad behaviour. Some argue they reinforce community bonds. Others say they expose the rot beneath. You don't care. All you know is that for one day life feels larger. You're not just a farm kid in a damp cottage. You're a spectator at a travelling miracle. You head home when the fires start to die and the music fades to a lopsided hum. Your boots are ruined, your hands are sticky, and your ears are still ringing from the drum. But you're smiling, a real one, the kind that starts somewhere deep and doesn't ask for permission. That night you lie in bed and replay every moment. The fire-swallowing boy, the candy, the monkey, the story about the Wolf King. You hold the stub of the sugar rooster in your hand until it melts. Your sister sleeps beside you, snoring softly. Your clothes stink of ale, smoke and joy. You're still poor, still cold, still you, but for one day you were something else, and that's enough to carry you through the next 100 muddy Tuesdays. It starts with a silence, not the peaceful kind like snow falling or a baby sleeping, but the kind that feels wrong. You step outside in the early morning and notice it immediately. No wind, no birds, no distant barking dog, just the dull stillness of world holding its breath. Then you see the sky, low and heavy, sagging like a wet sheet, and the smell, sour, damp, ominous. That's when you know something's gone wrong in the fields. You run toward the far pasture, boots squelching through soft patches of earth, heart already pounding. Your father is there ahead of you, standing in the middle of the crop rows, arms crossed, jaw set. He doesn't turn when you approach. He just gestures with a small jerk of his head. You follow his gaze, then you see it. The potatoes, black or grey or mushy. It's hard to say exactly, but they're not right. Some look as though they've melted in place. Others are riddled with tiny dark holes. You kneel down and dig your fingers into the soil, pulling one up. It crumbles in your hands like rotten fruit. The smell is thick and earthy and wrong. You look at your father. He just mutters, "blight," like it's a curse he's said too many times before. Here's your historical fact. Crop failure was an ever-present terror for rural Victorians, especially those dependent on single food staples like potatoes. Late blight, caused by a water mould, devastated crops across the British Isles, most infamously in Ireland, but also severely in rural England. With no pesticides, no storage safety nets, and no government relief, even one bad season could spell hunger, or worse. This season's been hard already. The weather was off, too wet, then too dry, then wet again. The seeds didn't take well, and now this. Your father curses under his breath and kicks at the ground. Your mother will cry, but not until the sun goes down. That's how it works here. You walk the length of the field together, but the result is the same. Rot. Maybe 10% of the crop is salvageable. Maybe. The rest is poison, inedible, spoiled, the kind of stuff that brings on vomiting and hallucinations if you're foolish enough to eat it. You'll still try, you always do. Hunger has a way of negotiating with your sense of caution. Back at the house, your mother is already counting. Not aloud, but in her head. Potatoes in the shed, flour in the barrel, jars of pickled beets. That one bag of dried peas no one's touched in a year. She's calculating how long it'll all last if rationed just so. You do the same math in your own way. If you skip breakfast and only eat supper, that saves food. If you steal an egg from the hens and eat it raw, no one has to know. This is where the fear begins, not in empty bellies, but in planning for them. You eat that night, but it's quieter. No one says much. The stew tastes thin, and even though your father insists it's just a light supper, everyone knows why it's light. You watch your younger brother scoop every last bit from his bowl, then lick the spoon. He's too young to hide his worry. Here's your quirky fact. In some rural households, families believed a spoon stood upright in a bowl of stew meant good fortune. Proof that it was thick enough to bring health. Tonight your spoon falls over. No one laughs. Later your father gathers the children and tells you not to worry. He says he'll trap more rabbits this winter, maybe sell some tools for flour. Your mother says the chickens might lay better once the frost sets in. Your older sister says she's not hungry anyway. Everyone's lying in the kindest way possible. There's a scholarly debate about how resilient rural families were during crop failures. Some argue they had systems, bartering, foraging, communal support. Others argue that these systems broke down quickly when everyone was desperate. From where you're sitting, clutching a piece of bread that's more crust than substance, you suspect both are true. People help when they can, but most can't. You try to sleep, but hunger has a noise all its own. It growls and creaks and gnaws from the inside out. You curl tighter under your thin blanket, legs pressed to your chest, hand over your belly as if you could soothe it by touch. Your sister beside you mumbles in her sleep something about porridge. You don't correct her. By morning it's colder. Your breath clouds the air before you even crawl out of bed. The fire's gone out. The inside of the window has frost feathers along the edges. Your mum hands you a cup of hot water with a splash of milk, no sugar. She calls it milk tea, you call it wishful thinking. You and your brother head out to check the traps. If you're lucky, there's a rabbit. If you're really lucky, it's fat. Today there's a squirrel. Half frozen, stiff, you bring it back anyway. Meat is meat. Your father tries to sell some wood in the village, but most people have the same idea. Everyone's cold, everyone's worried. The village shopkeeper lets him trade an old hatchet for a bag of flour. It's thin, off-white stuff, probably mixed with chalk. You'll eat it anyway. You help your mother bake flatbread over the fire that night. Just flour and water and a bit of salt. It's hot at least. The smell fills the house and makes everyone pause, eyes closing for just a second to pretend this is normal. You burn your fingers pulling yours from the skillet and blow on it quickly. It tastes like ash and dust and desperation. You chew slowly, make it last. You're not starving yet, but you're close. You know the signs, the smaller portions, the skipped meals, the way your father now finishes everything on his plate. He used to leave scraps. Not anymore. And still, somehow, the days go on. You feed the animals, you mend the roof, you stretch food like taffy thinner and thinner until it almost disappears. The worst part isn't being hungry, it's knowing it'll get worse before it gets better. And that better might never come. It's Christmas morning, supposedly. There's no tree, no presents, no jingling bells or warm carols sung by a rosy-cheeked choir. Instead, there's frost on the inside of the walls, your breath puffing like smoke signals in the dim morning light, and your mum clanging around the kitchen with the enthusiasm of someone preparing a feast out of string and hope. You blink blearily from under a scratchy blanket, your body curled like a snail against the cold, and wonder what makes today different from any other grim morning. Then you remember the goose. Well, not your goose. It belonged to the neighbour until yesterday, when your father made a deal involving a cracked mirror, a half bag of coal, and a promise to help rebuild their fence come spring. Somehow that trade resulted in a bird that's now lying belly up on your kitchen table, neck flopped like an empty sock, eyes closed forever. Your younger siblings have spent the morning sneaking glances at it like it might come back to life and exact revenge. You pull your clothes on layer by layer, all of them stiff with use and infused with the now familiar perfume of smoke, sweat and despair. It's a holiday technically, but holidays here just mean different work, not less. Your father is outside already, sharpening the knife on a stone, his breath hissing through clenched teeth. He's muttering something about sinew and wishbones. You don't offer to help with the butchering, you've helped before, and Christmas or not, you're not in the mood for feathers and blood under your fingernails. Your job today is peeling. Potatoes, carrots, anything vaguely root-shaped and edible. The potatoes are mostly soft or spotted from the blight, but a few are salvageable if you cut deep enough. The carrots are stunted and oddly shaped, and your sister insists one of them looks like a foot, you eat it anyway. Here's your historical fact. For many Victorian rural families, Christmas was not a day of leisure or luxury. It was a brief, often exhausting pause in the usual rhythm of survival. Special meals were cobbled together from whatever was available, maybe a goose, maybe just a larger loaf of bread. The idea of gift-giving was uncommon among the poor, though some children received fruit, nuts, or small handmade toys, simple things that could be cherished or eaten, depending on how desperate the winter was. Today your gift is a button, literally. One shiny black button your mother sewed onto your coat to replace the missing top one. It's round, smooth, and warm from her hands. You touch it like a treasure. You'd laugh, but it might break you. The goose is plucked, gutted, and stuffed with stale bread, onion, and dried herbs from the shelf. It smells hopeful. It fills the house with a warmth that you haven't felt in weeks, something other than damp socks and boiled barley. The fire crackles merrily, or as merrily as fire can when it's mostly just trying to keep people alive. Dinner is served mid-afternoon. The entire family crowds around the table, elbows bumping, knees touching. Your sister says grace, or something like it, half prayer, half poem, thanking the goose, the field, and whatever didn't eat us this year. You nod solemnly. Here's your quirky fact. Some Victorian families believed that eating the parson's nose, the fatty rear of the goose, on Christmas Day would bring luck for the coming year. No one in your house wants it, so you volunteer. It's greasy and gelatinous, and for a moment you imagine it is luck, melting in your mouth. You chew slowly, dramatically. Your brother is jealous. Mission accomplished. After the meal you sit around the hearth, full in a way you've almost forgotten. Real fullness. Like your belly might burst instead of echo, your father sings a song that drifts halfway into snoring by the second verse. Your mother drinks a thimble of elderberry wine and goes pink in the cheeks. Your sister shows off the doll she made from old rags, complete with a skirt made from scrap lace. It's ugly in the most beautiful way. There's a scholarly debate about how meaningful holidays were to rural families in the Victorian era. Some historians claim they were vital, emotional lifelines, points of light in a dark year. Others argue they were more symbolic than celebratory, a performance of tradition without much substance behind it. You think both ideas are true, it matters, but it doesn't fix anything. You step outside while the others nap or clean or stare into the flames. The sky is low and grey, like wet wool stretched overhead. A few sad flakes drift down and disappear before they land. You stick your tongue out anyway, it tastes like sky and soot. There's no music out here, no laughter. Just the slow creak of a tree in the wind, and somewhere far off, the faint bleating of a sheep too cold to care. You walk down to the field, your boots crunching in the frost, and stare at the empty rows where the potatoes used to grow. You think about spring, then you try not to. On the way back you find a small sprig of holly still clinging to life near the ditch. You snap it off and tuck it behind your ear. Why not? You're festive now. Your brother laughs when he sees you, then punches your arm for no reason. You punch him back. Merry Christmas. That night the fire burns a little longer. You share the last crust of goose fat on toast and tell stories about holidays you barely remember. Like the one where Uncle Ned got drunk on cider and tried to dance on the table. Or the time the snow piled so high, your mum baked bread in the hearth because the stove was buried. You're not sure if those stories are even true, but they feel true. That's enough. You go to bed warm or warmer than usual. Your fingers aren't stiff and your stomach isn't howling. You wrap your scarf around your feet and press the holly sprig under your pillow. It was a good day. You still live in a freezing, falling apart cottage. You still stink. You're still one bad storm away from starving. But today, you ate goose, and for now, that's enough. You're woken by a sound you know too well. Hoofbeats on frozen earth, the jingle of tack and the low, guttural voice of a man who doesn't care whether anyone's still asleep. You sit up groggily, squinting through the frost that's crept in along the edge of the window. Outside, in the grey light of early morning, a rider in a long, mud-streaked coat dismounts from a stocky bay horse. His boots crunch as he stomps across the yard, leaving behind thick hoof prints and a rising sense of dread. No one visits this early, unless something bad has happened, or is about to. You stumble out of bed and pull on your coat. No time for socks. You can hear your father's voice now, gruff and tense, muttering through the crack in the door. You can't hear the other man's words, just the rhythm of them, clipped, official, not the way neighbours speak. This is someone from outside, an enforcer of something. Your stomach turns. You creep down the hallway and catch just enough of the conversation to know it's about taxes. Again, or rent, or both. There's some dispute over the plot lines, or missing payment, a boundary stone moved by frost. It hardly matters. The man wants money your family doesn't have. Here's your historical fact. Many rural Victorian families were tenant farmers, meaning they didn't own the land they lived on. They rented it from landowners, often wealthy and absentee. Rent was expected no matter the weather, the crop yield, or the family's circumstances. Late payments meant eviction, and disputes over land boundaries or tithe obligations were common, often settled by men who never spent a day working the soil themselves. The rider hands your father a paper, creased and smudged, and tells him to appear before a local magistrate. There's no point arguing. Your father just folds the paper with stiff fingers and nods once. The man mounts his horse, turns it with one pull of the reins, and disappears into the mist like something from a bad dream. Your mother looks pale when she hears. She says nothing for a moment, then goes to knead dough that isn't quite enough for a full loaf. You know better than to ask what the paper says exactly. It means stress, that much is clear. It means maybe selling tools or chickens or your older sister's shawl. It might mean going to court, it might mean the village hearing your father called a liar, or worse. You've never been to a courtroom, but you imagine it smells like paper and anger. The rest of the day goes on in an odd silence. Not angry, just tight. Like everyone's trying to pretend they're not listening to the wind howl louder through the gaps in the windows. You and your siblings are told to stay out of the way, which you do by default, retreating to the barn where it's at least warm from the animals. You sit in the hay, listening to the cows chew and the chickens mutter to themselves. Your brother picks at a scab. You stare at the rafters. Here's your quirky fact. Some rural families in the 19th century believed that livestock could sense impending misfortune, especially legal trouble. A cow refusing to rise or a hen laying a blood-streaked egg was considered a bad omen. You don't believe in omens, but you do notice the dog hasn't barked all day. He just lies there, tail twitching, eyes half-lidded. You'd ask what he knows if you thought he'd answer. Your father doesn't speak much that night. He eats slowly, pushing boiled parsnips around the plate, and then disappears outside with a lantern. You hear him chopping something, maybe firewood, maybe his own frustration. Your mother hums softly, not a tune, just something to fill the air. Your sister works on her ragdoll again, stitching a new arm from the cuff of a worn-out shirt. There's a scholarly debate about how much agency rural tenants really had. Some argue that they were oppressed, trapped in an endless cycle of labour and debt, forced to accept whatever terms the landlord set. Others say they negotiated, bartered, resisted in small but meaningful ways. You think both are true depending on the family and the day. But you also know this: when a man on a horse comes with paper, there's very little you can do. By morning, your father has shaved and put on his best coat, the one with only 2 patches. He takes the paper and heads to the village alone. You don't ask to go with him. You wouldn't be allowed in the magistrate's office anyway. You help your mother with the wash instead, scrubbing your knuckles raw on the cold board, hands deep in icy water that bites like regret. He returns late, shoulders stiff, face obtudable. He doesn't say what happened, just sits at the table and pulls off his boots slowly. Your mum makes tea with barely a drop of milk. He drinks it and says, "We've got until the end of next month." Then he says nothing else. You lie awake that night thinking about what the end of next month means. Could be nothing, could be everything, could be eviction, could be debt collectors, could be walking away from this Sir Dupuis smoke-scarred, flea-bitten cottage with nothing but a sack and whatever pride fits inside. You try to imagine where you'd go. A cousin's house? The poorhouse? One of those charity homes in the city that people whisper about, where the windows are barred and the food is doled out in ladles by someone who doesn't know your name. You close your eyes and try not to think at all. There's no magic solution, no heroic act, no Deus Ex pig that can save the day, just time ticking forward, snow coming down and your father staying up late by the fire, trying to make numbers out of nothing. You watch him from the corner of the room as he stares into the flames. He looks smaller than usual, not weaker, just distant, like part of him has already moved somewhere else. You wrap your arms around your knees and lean against the wall. The fire crackles. The house groans in the wind. You don't know how this ends, but for now you're still here. You're sent to the village early with a basket of eggs and a threadbare hope that someone might trade for flour or candles. The snow's melted just enough to turn the road into a slushy mess, ankle deep and thick with the smell of wet earth, manure, and something that might once have been optimism. You trudge through it with your scarf wrapped tight over your nose, breath fogging your vision, one hand gripping the basket so hard your knuckles turn white. The eggs rattle with each step like they're warning you not to slip. The village is already busy, not joyful, not bustling, just moving. Men hauling carts through puddles, women haggling over apples too bruised to count as fruit, children watching everything with that half-hungry, half-curious look you know too well. You pass the chapel, its bell cracked and unused, and make your way to the shop. Old Mr. Godfrey runs it. He's got a beard like dried moss, and eyes that haven't twinkled since the Queen was young. He squints at your eggs, sniffs one like it might explode, and finally grunts. 4 eggs for half a sack, he says, not even bothering to name what it's a sack of. You nod. It could be flour, it could be sawdust. You'll take it. Here's your historical fact. Rural trading in the Victorian period was often based more on barter than coin. Poor families swapped goods and services whenever possible, especially in tight-knit villages where currency was rare and trust or reputation carried value. A chicken might be worth a few pounds of turnips. A child's labour might pay for a pair of boots. Every deal was a negotiation, every transaction a gamble. You leave with the sack slung over your shoulder, your fingers numb, and your pride slightly bruised. On the way back, you spot something odd near the old mill road. Smoke. Thin, curling and not from any chimney you recognise. You pause, You probably shouldn't go see. You do anyway. The smoke leads to a ragged little tent pitched on the edge of a field that no one's farmed in years. A kettle swings above a small fire, and next to it sits a girl, not much older than you, wrapped in a coat several sizes too big, her hair a tangle of curls escaping from a scarf. She's humming, loudly, badly, and she doesn't seem the least bit surprised when you stop and stare. "Hello," she says, not shy, not frightened, just, like she's been waiting. You manage a quiet hello back. She pats the log beside her. Her name is Elsie. She's a traveller, part of a group that's moved on without her for a while, heading toward the coast. She says it like it's no big thing, like being left behind is just part of the rhythm. She offers you tea, which turns out to be warm ditch water, with a few mint leaves floating on top, and you drink it without hesitation because it's warm and you're tired of saying no to kindness. Here's your quirky fact. Victorian society often viewed travellers, sometimes called gypsies, tinkers or Romani, with suspicion, but they played essential roles in rural life. They sold tools, mended pots, told stories, and brought news from far-off towns. Their knowledge of herbs, animals, and weather patterns often outstripped that of the settled villagers, and despite their outsider status, they were woven into the fabric of rural survival, respected, feared, envied. Elsie shows you a little wooden bird she carved with a pocket knife. Its wings don't move, but she says if you whisper to it at night, it'll carry your worries away. You laugh, not at her, just at the idea of something so simple. She shrugs. "It works if you believe it," she says. "You don't believe in much anymore, but you take the bird." She tells you a story about a hedgehog who tricked a bear out of his honey, then one about a girl who got turned into a fox for stealing a priest's boots. You don't know which ones are true. You don't care. Her voice is warm, and the smoke smells like pine instead of coal. For 20 minutes you forget the magistrate, the rent, the frostbitten turnips, and the hollow-eyed way your mum stares at the bread bin. When it's time to leave, she presses a coin into your palm. It's not real, wood painted silver, but it's beautiful. "For luck," she says. "Or trade it for a smile, whichever's more valuable today." You walk home lighter somehow, even though the sack digs into your shoulder and your boots are soaked through. When your father asks what took you so long, you shrug. You don't mention Elsie. Some things are better kept like that, soft, private, unspoiled by the cold machinery of everyday worry. That night you show your sister the bird. She sleeps with it clutched in her fist, breathing easier than she has all week. You don't believe it works, but you're not entirely sure it doesn't. There's a scholarly debate, yes, about whether stories and symbols served as emotional coping mechanisms or as functional parts of rural resilience. Were they escapism, or essential tools for maintaining morale? You don't care. If a carved bird makes your sister sleep through the night, then it's the most important object in the house. You lie down beside him, the wooden coin still in your pocket, warm from your hand. You think about Elsie, her off-key humming, her tea, her calm. You wonder if you'll ever see her again. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the walls like a warning. But inside, for once, it's quiet. It's raining again. Not a gentle drizzle or a poetic mist, but that kind of relentless, sideways, slap-your-face rain that feels personal. The kind that seeps into your sleeves, your shoes, your bones. You wake up to the sound of it hammering the roof like it's trying to make a point. And maybe it is. You lie there for a while, blanket pulled over your head, debating whether today is worth getting up for. But eventually, like always, survival wins the argument. The roof's leaking in 3 places now. You step into a puddle right beside your own bed, a chilly reminder that your house is no longer waterproof. Your mother has placed a bucket beneath the drip, which makes a musical plink-plink with every drop. She says it's comforting. You think it sounds like a slow death. Breakfast is dry bread and a smear of something that might be jam if you squint. Your sister tries to pretend it's cake. You play along. Everyone's had practice at this point, pretending what you have is something better. Your father's out in the shed, trying to fix the trapline again. You're assigned to the animals. You step outside and immediately regret it. The mud is ankle-deep, clinging, pulling, trying to swallow your boots whole. The chickens look like soggy regrets. The pigs don't even bother to grunt hello. The cow gives you a long, slow blink that says she's as over this as you are. You feed them all in silence, the rain dripping off your nose and soaking through your shirt like a slow-moving betrayal. Here's your historical fact. Many rural Victorian homes, especially those of the working class, were little more than glorified sheds. Damp, poorly insulated, with earthen or barely boarded floors, these cottages offered little protection against weather, pests or illness. Roofs leaked, windows cracked, and mould was a regular companion. Entire families often slept in a single room, huddled for warmth under blankets that hadn't been properly washed in years. By midday the fire's gone out, too damp, too much smoke. You and your mother try to relight it with damp kindling and swearing, but it only sputters and coughs. You give up and wrap yourselves in shawls instead, your breath fogging in the kitchen, like two ghosts trying to keep warm. That's when the neighbour bursts in. Mr. Tilly, red in the face and soaked to the skin, holding his cap like it's trying to fly away. "Flood's come down off the hill," he says, voice too loud for the room. "Barn roof collapsed. One of the cows gone. Chickens floated straight into the stream." You blink. He's not your favourite neighbour. He once tried to sell you an onion for a song, but today he's not bartering. He's scared. You follow him, half running through the rain, your boots losing their battle against the mud. When you reach the low field, you see it. Water pouring down like the whole sky tipped over. The stream now a full river, washing over fences and dragging bits of hay, rope, and someone's outhouse downstream. It's chaos. The village is a mess. People shouting, slipping, chasing after livestock, tossing sandbags like that's going to stop nature. You help where you can, hauling buckets, lifting sacks, catching a wayward chicken with heroic flair and only a little screaming. Your coat is soaked, your skin numb, but you keep going. Here's your quirky fact. In some parts of rural England, it was believed that flood waters carried not just debris, but bad luck. Children weren't allowed to step in puddles formed from floods for fear it would bring illness or invite restless spirits into the home. Today you stomp through every puddle like you're daring the spirits to try something. By the time things settle, it's late afternoon. The worst of the water has passed, leaving behind a path of soggy destruction. You've never seen so much mud. Someone's pig is stuck in a hedge. Someone else is crying over a fence that's no longer attached to anything. A boy you recognise is kneeling in the muck, holding a drowned kitten. It's not the worst disaster you've seen, but it's close. There's a scholarly debate, obviously, about how rural communities responded to environmental crises in the Victorian period. Some argue these events forged stronger community bonds, forcing neighbours to rely on one another. Others suggest they exposed how fragile those bonds really were, how quickly people turned selfish, hoarded supplies, or blamed outsiders. Today you see both. One man offers you a warm roll from his hearth, another tries to charge you a penny to borrow a shovel. You trudge home as the light fades, your legs leaden and your body soaked clean through. Your mother is trying to wring out your father's only pair of wool socks. He's swearing in the corner, trying to repair a roof shingle with nothing but wire and spit. The fire still isn't lit. You light a candle instead. It barely flickers, but it's something. You sit beside your sister and hand her a bit of dried apple someone pressed into your palm as thanks earlier. She chews it like it's gold. You both listen to the storm moving off into the distance, grumbling like an old man who didn't get his way. That night, as you lie in bed, your feet freezing and your back aching from lifting buckets, you wonder what it would be like to live somewhere dry, somewhere with real walls and dry socks, and a fire that doesn't sulk every time it rains. You imagine a bed with sheets, not just burlap and hope. You imagine waking up not cold. The thought is so foreign it makes you laugh. You still have the wooden bird from Elsie. It sits on the shelf beside your bed, its carved wings gathering dust. You whisper to it again, just in case. Outside, the rain eases into mist. The world smells like wet wood and disappointment. But it's quiet now. You're soaked, filthy, sore and cold, but the roof is still standing, and sometimes that's enough to count as a good day. And so here you are, at the edge of the journey, standing in the thin light of early dawn with mud on your boots, soot in your lungs, and a quiet that feels earned. The cottage still leans a little more to one side than it ought to. The windows are still cracked. The fire is stubborn and weak in the hearth. And there's a draught that's never been successfully explained. You pull your coat tighter. There's no warmth in it, but habits die harder than hope. The village wakes slowly, as if unsure the world deserves another go. Chickens stir, dogs bark half-heartedly. Someone coughs behind thin walls. Another day begins, indistinguishable from the one before it and likely from the one after. But you've changed. Or maybe you've just noticed what was always there. How survival isn't noble, but it is hard. How joy isn't a grand event, but a moment snatched between chores. How love hides in burnt crusts of bread and mended socks and the rough fingers that press a coin into your palm without saying a word. You still live in a damp cottage in a village that doesn't appear on most maps. You still smell faintly of turnips. Your future isn't promised. But you've danced at the fair, stared down a magistrate and made it through a flood without losing your mind or your boots. That counts for something. And as you sit on the fence post, watching the clouds break just enough to show a sliver of sky, real blue, the colour of dreams, you realise you're still here. You with your carved bird, your stories half true, your belly only slightly empty. You've survived a life that wanted to forget you, and somehow you're still laughing.